All right.
Good morning, everyone. The meeting of the Interdepartmental Serious Mental Illness Coordinating Committee, also known as the ISMIC, is now called to order. We will now conduct the roll call of the committee members to ensure that we have a quorum before we begin. We will start with the federal membership in the order outlined in our charter. The federal membership or designee representing the agency should state their name or respond here when the agency is called. The Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Joel Dubinetz for the Office of the Secretary.
Thank you, Joel. The Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use.
Dr. Miriam Delphin-Rittman, present.
The Attorney General.
Maria Lifshitz for the Department of Justice.
The Secretary of Department of Veterans Affairs.
Sandy Resnick for the VA.
The Secretary of Department of Defense. I'm sorry, go ahead. The Secretary of Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Lori Minor-Smith for HUD. Thank you.
The Secretary of Education. The Secretary of Department of Labor.
Rhonda Basha for Taryn Williams.
Thank you, Rhonda. The Administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Kirsten Baronio here representing CMS.
Thank you. The Administrator of the Administration for Community Living.
Elliot Kennedy here representing ACL.
Thank you, Elliot. And the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration.
Kathy McCoy for SSA.
Now we will conduct a roll call of the non-federal members going in alphabetical order. Please respond here when your name is called. Trinity Aguilera. Ron Bruno.
Here.
David Covington.
Good morning here.
Brian Hepburn.
Here.
Jennifer Higgins.
Here.
Johanna Candle.
Here.
Stephen Leichman.
Good morning, I'm here.
Adrian Lightfoot. Amanda Lipp.
Here.
For the record, Sue Smith will be joining us this afternoon. Juanola Sprague. Ruthelia Stroud.
Here. Good morning.
Artilo St. Amar.
Present.
Sarah Benson.
Good morning. I'm here.
Catherine Warburton.
Here.
And Anitra Warrior.
Good morning. Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum. As a reminder, today's meeting is being live streamed. Please place all electronic devices on silent mode. Virtual speakers are reminded to please state your name when speaking so the transcriptionist and writer can capture your information. I will now turn our meeting over to the Interdepartmental Serious Mental Illness Coordinating Committee Chair, Dr. Miriam Delphin-Rittman.
Thank you so much, Pam. And I just want to say good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome. This is actually our first meeting of 2024, so we are excited to be able to welcome you. I'll talk a little bit more about just sort of committee membership in a moment, because I'm excited that we have some new members that we're going to welcome to the committee as well. And so I'll do their introductions in a moment, but I just wanted to take a moment to say that, I'm so grateful, and we're so grateful to all of you for your service to the ISMIC. We really see this as such an important committee and appreciate our discussions and the work that often happens between meetings, and just wanted to share that with you all. Before we dive in further, because we really do have quite a packed agenda, I'm excited about the meeting today because there are a number of really important areas that we will talk about. But I do want to go ahead and turn the meeting back over to Ms. Foote, who is going to take us through the minutes, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the agenda. So Pam, I'll turn it back over to you for the approval and consideration of the minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Delphin-Rittman. So everyone should have received a copy of the October 18th, 2023 meeting minutes from me for review. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the meeting minutes? Great. We will go ahead and move forward with a motion to accept the meeting minutes. Motion
Jennifer
one.
Higgins. I move that we accept the meeting minutes.
Thank you, Jennifer. Motion two.
Ron Bruno, second.
Thank you, Ron. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. Thank you so much. The minutes are adopted. I will now turn the meeting agenda back over to Dr. Delphin Rittman.
All right, thank you so much. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through a series of updates. We've been quite busy since our last meeting, and so just wanted to make sure that everyone is updated on some of the key areas of work that we have going on across SAMHSA. So I'll start by giving a brief update of where we are with our 2024 National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. We're getting quite close with that and anticipate that that will be released pretty soon. We'll talk also about some of our work related to kids' online health and safety and some of the activities that are happening there. We've been doing a series of listening sessions and we'll give a little bit of update there. We'll talk also about some of our substance use disorder related updates. We know that co-occurring, related considerations, they're important for this committee as well. So really just want to make sure that everyone is updated related to some of the activities there. We're really excited about our updates related to the tribal behavioral health agenda. Equity certainly is an important cross-cutting principle across SAMHSA. And so we'll share some of content there related to the tribal behavioral health agenda. GIPRAs, we've had a lot of discussion as well about GIPRAs. So we'll also provide an update about some of our next generation GIPRA work. And then we'll do some ISMIC membership updates, and really, really excited to be able to welcome some new members as well. Next slide. So I'll start with the 2024 National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. Really excited about the activity that's happening here. This is work that's being done through the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council, which is leading the interdepartmental charge to update the 2024 NSSP. In many ways, the new plan will build on the 2012 National Strategy, which did expire in 2022. And it'll also build on and reference certainly the Surgeon General's call to action, and that'll be part of the content as well. We are anticipating releasing it in 2024, spring 2024. So we're getting close. We definitely feel like we're on the home stretch, and we'll soon be giving this document wings. Next slide. Okay. So one thing I wanted to note is that the strategy does align with many of our recent priorities and initiatives. In particular, it will include topics that addressing health equity, including, in addition, youth and social media. There'll also be content looking at the intersection of suicide and substance use. And then you'll see other areas included within the strategy will include the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, the workplace suicide prevention, and then also a focus on equity and social determinants of health. So really quite a rich document that is in process and certainly will be done soon. Next slide. One thing I wanted to stress is that this activity has been just a lot of interdepartmental and sort of cross-government work here to be able to put the plan together. And so just wanted to share, and I know you can't see this, there's a lot happening on this slide, but just wanted to share, a slide that has the many different agencies that are weighing in and providing content with the plan. And so these are just the agencies that have been involved in that work. Next slide. Also wanted to talk about the Kids Online Health and Safety Task Force. So the task force really was called into action May 23rd, 2023. And Biden-Harris administration announced really through the actions to protect youth mental health and safety online. And so through that announcement, the task force really came into being. You'll see the task force membership in terms of the different logos there. So it includes members of, HHS, Department of Commerce, and it really is chaired by SAMHSA and Department of Commerce, Department of Education, again, across agency and cross HHS and cross government collaboration. The goal of the task force is to bring together sort of stakeholders, policymakers, family members, quite a bit of collaboration. We're doing a series of listening sessions now, just did one on Monday with Morehouse. It had youth online as well as parents. And the goal ultimately is to come up with recommendations to safeguard youth in terms of their online safety. We know that there are many dangers and harms out there in terms of what young people are experiencing online. And so some of the goal is to sort of protect young folks in terms of safety, security, as well as other factors that may contribute to mental health related risks. So quite a bit of activity happening there as well. And we'll keep everyone updated on ultimately the products and the resources that come out of that task force as well. Next slide. Why don't you also talk about some of our work in the substance use disorder space, quite a bit of activity there in terms of updating 42 CFR Part 2. We were so appreciative of just the range of public comments that we received to be able to put together that final rule. There's a lot in there, so I won't go into too much detail, but some of what the rule does is it really helps to facilitate greater provider and patient collaboration needed for care coordination. Ultimately, that's one of the long range goals or one of the key goals, to be able to enhance and strengthen communication and collaboration and healthcare integration. It also works to strengthen patient confidentiality, and there's greater alignment with HIPAA as part of this rule as well. So really pleased to be able to get that over the finish line. And we received a ton of public comment, and that was really helpful as well to be able to put together the final rule. Next slide. Also finalized 42 CFR Part 8, and this is the rule related to the treatment of opioid treatment programs. In many respects, a key goal of one of the goals anyway, was to make permanent the flexibilities that were put in place as a function of the pandemic. That's something that we heard that patients appreciated in terms of being able to have greater flexibility related to take-home doses. Goal also to improve collaboration with partner services and to facilitate access to medications for opioid use disorder. So really pleased about that final rule as well. Next slide. Okay. So the final rule, as I did mention, it does make permanent take-home methadone doses. It essentially reframes rule-based clinical judgment and looking at risk assessment. It emphasizes patient education on safe transportation and storage of medications. Also allows patients eligibility for take-home doses upon entry to treatment. So quite a bit within that rule. And so again, pleased to get that over the finish line. And you see the QR code. We love the QR codes, by the way. So there is a QR code that links directly to that rule as well. Next slide. Okay. In terms of the what the changes promote, I mean, a big thing that was a goal is just creating a cultural shift in care and service delivery. So again, many folks talked about, and what we've heard from patients is that they feel trusted. They feel trusted to be able to have take-home doses, and that helps to facilitate recovery. In addition, sort of creating responsive, flexible OTP services that are grounded in evidence, acknowledging the skill and patient-centered understanding of treating practitioners, and ultimately promoting, greater access to medication for opioid use disorder and working to reduce stigma. So all of these are key areas that really are promoted through the provision and the passing of this rule, or the finalization of this rule. Next slide. We are also really, really thrilled to be able to finalize and release the harm reduction framework. Again, that framework started by, first there was a harm reduction summit, probably about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now. One thing that came out of the summit is that we needed more information around really how to define harm reduction, what it looks like in terms of, in terms of day-to-day activities at the program level, what particular policies help to support harm reduction, particular practices. And so you see the QR code there as well. That will take you directly to the harm reduction framework. There are about 6 different principles, 12 core practices, and sort of a number of key areas that fully operationalize and further operationalize harm reduction strategies. So do take a look at that as well. Next slide. Also wanted to be able to update about our tribal behavioral health agenda. So we did develop a new online platform to be able to share the TBHA. Again, we see this and what tribal members have told us is that through collaboration, this blueprint really, or the agenda is a blueprint around how to strengthen policies and programs around working with tribal communities from a culture responsive perspective. There is a cultural wisdom declaration that's included within the TBHA. And so that really talks about the importance of traditional practices and strategies and the importance of taking those into account when working with tribal members and tribal communities. We are actually in the process of updating the 2016 Tribal Behavioral Health Agenda, and that has been done real collaboratively with tribal members through our TTAC, so our Tribal Technical Assistance advisory group, as well as others. And so that should be done. We're looking at this spring as well, so stay tuned there. And ultimately that will be made available online, really to be able to sort of increase access and increase dissemination, of the blueprint itself. All right, next slide. Okay. So also want to talk about our data strategy and our next generation GIPRA. Some of what we've heard on an ongoing sort of basis is that our GIPRAs at times can be onerous and for some folks can feel like a barrier to care. And so one thing that we're working on is streamlining the GIPRA, looking to bring the tool down to about a half hour or so, looking to have a reduced number of items, ultimately to be able to reduce burden both for people who are participating in programs as well as our grantees. And so stay tuned there. That is we are steeped in that as we speak, and there are a number of sort of internal working groups. We've also done some listening sessions related to what GIPRA modernization would need to look like to be able to reduce burden both at the patient level and our people that we're serving, as well as the grantee level. This is one component of our overall data strategy that was released, our 2023 to 2026 data strategy. And so one of the key areas that strategy outlines is the importance of, addressing burden, reducing burden within data collection, but then also the importance of sort of data quality, data dissemination, and a number of different areas to be able to help better utilize our data in a way that helps to tell the story of the grantees and our initiatives. Next slide, please. Okay. And so I did talk about this already, that ultimately we're looking to develop one overall GIPRA tool that's about 30 minutes or less. The goal ultimately will be able to sort of find that sort of middle spot between collecting data, but then not having so much data that it's onerous both for clients and grantees. But we still need to be able to collect data to tell the story of the programs, often from members of Congress and others. A question that we get is like, what impact are the grants having? And so to be able to have a strong GIPRA tool, but that's significantly reduced in terms of burden, ultimately is the goal there. Next slide. So I wanted to take a moment to say a special recognition and special thank you and acknowledgement to Judge Leifman. And so Judge Leifman was recently recognized by Pope Francis and awarded the Papal Medal of Benemerenti in October. And it was in recognition for his work in terms of making tireless work, that is, around protecting the dignity of all human lives, particularly in his work within the judicial system and the treatment of those with mental health challenges. And so Judge Leifman, we just want to say congratulations and that wonderful honor. And again, thank you for your service, not only to the ISMIC, but to your work that you're doing there in Florida with the individuals that you're serving. So congratulations on that wonderful recognition. And we're so honored to have you as part of the ISMIC. So
Thank you.
for
Very,
all.
very thoughtful of you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm also really, really pleased to be able to welcome several new ISMIC members. We have one new federal member from the Department of Defense, and that is retired Rear Admiral Susan Ortega. And Rear Admiral Ortega is a distinguished public health expert and a 2-star Admiral in the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps. She's been recognized for her contributions to nursing and healthcare, disaster response, global health diplomacy. She's a new Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Services Policy and Oversight, and will be representing the Department of Defense as the newest delegate to the ISMIC. So Rear Admiral Ortega, just wanted to welcome you to the ISMIC and really, really appreciate your service and to the ISMIC. We also have 3 new non-federal members that want to welcome as well. We're pleased to welcome Arc Taylor St. Amour, and many of us know Arc as Tay, and so Tay is the Executive Director of Youth Move National. Tay describes himself as a neurodivergent, queer, transgender, nonconforming person of Mexican indigenous descent, and a childhood victim survivor of trauma who deeply believes in listening to youth voices and the power of holistic affirmation and self-agency. Tay spent over 10 years in the national for-profit industry as an upper-level manager, director, and business developer, opening startups, working with established organizations to expand into new territories all over the U.S. Following this, Tay spent another 10 years active in the nonprofit space, working with organizations through Chicago, New York, Vermont, California, Michigan, centering on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so Tay, we welcome you to the ISMIC as well. Also want to welcome Dr. Sarah Vinson. Dr. Sarah Vinson is a triple board certified psychiatrist who specializes in adult, child, and adolescent and forensic psychiatry. She is chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health Sciences at Morehouse School of Medicine, and director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship Program. She's also an adjunct faculty at Emory School of Medicine. And so Dr. Vinson, want to welcome you to the ISMIC and really, really appreciate your membership and service to the ISMIC. And finally, we'll be joined by Dr. Anitra Warrior. And Dr. Warrior is an American Indian child psychologist and owner of Morningstar Counseling, and is from the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma. Dr. Warrior has provided clinical services to children and families throughout the state of Nebraska for the past 15 years. Morningstar Counseling has 7 locations and partners with multiple school districts, colleges, tribes, and organizations to support healthy development and the mental well-being of children and families across the state. And so I want to say a special welcome to Dr. Warrior as well. Okay. So we are excited about all of our new members, and as you may recall, the ISMIC did a SWOT analysis and determined its path forward. One area that was identified that we really need to strengthen and wanted to do more work is in terms of our focus on youth with SED. So not only does the membership strengthen not only do the members strengthen the ISMIC with their diverse personal and professional backgrounds, but they'll assist us in ensuring that we're addressing the areas that we wanted to and the areas that came up in our most recent discussions. So again, thank you and welcome to our new members. And I'm now going to turn the floor over to Dr. Anita Everett, who will provide a few brief welcoming remarks as well. Dr. Everett?
So thank you. And thank you, Dr. Doppelman, for your wonderful summary of activities across SAMHSA at large. So it turns out that I've been involved with ISMIC since its very beginning. So that has made me a bit of a historian, I think, for then. What I wanted to do in my few remarks is just to give a historical context of ISMIC, just particularly since we have new members here. So ISMIC was first authorized in an act of Congress that's called the 21st Century Cures Act, which was passed in December of 2016. One of the last acts that was passed by the Obama administration. This was passed at a time when Congress had some concerns that SAMHSA had or somewhere alleging SAMHSA had lost its way with regards to attention on serious mental illness. And so it was created as an effort to put SAMHSA in a leadership role across the federal government to assure that not only was SAMHSA focusing on or reinvigorating its mission to address the concerns and needs of individuals with serious mental illnesses, as well as children with serious emotional disturbances, but also to coordinate across federal agencies. And so thus we have the membership, as was represented visually in the slides that Dr. Delphin Rittman, our Assistant Secretary, showed earlier, that has federal agencies that have a stake in activity in the area of service or addressing the needs of individuals with a serious mental illness. It was authorized once, and then a second time was reauthorized. And unless it's authorized again, this group would terminate or would sunset in September of 2027. So there is that's the history basically of ISMIC. The original group of ISMIC members, the first report to Congress that was created from the original group was organized around 5 focus areas, and that has become a tradition of SAMHSA. And much of our agenda today is organized around those 5 focus areas, which were intended to be a way to sort of organize sets of needs around that. And we have also developed or maintained subcommittees which report to the central ISMIC committee, to this body here, report out on activity that the focus area groups, subgroups, or subcommittees are engaging in, reaching out to assure tracking in and developing new ideas or new projects around. Those groups are led typically by federal staff. Most of them are SAMHSA staff. The role we've called is stewards, picking up on the idea that it's part of their stewarding as a part of a public servant role. And we welcome membership from anyone of our ISMIC members, federal and non-federal, to participate in those meetings. And you'll see as we go through the agenda today who the various leads are if you're a new member and you're interested in participating in any of those subcommittees. This is an activity that's formed under a thing called a FACA, or a Federal Advisory Committee Act, which regulates how we can work. And in that vein, the subcommittees are derivatives of the main committee. Subcommittees don't have separate autonomy. They need to report into the ISMIC body as a whole. And that's sort of how that's structured. One of the other traditions that we've reinvigorated with ISMIC, initially in ISMIC, we had a newsletter that went out that was designed to keep alive the activity and attention. We're in an era where all of us have too many emails to keep up with on a daily basis. And so the newsletter, which Joel and Belina have put together for us, is intended to be something that sort of keeps us aware of what's going on with regards to that, and make sure that there's awareness that federal government has not abandoned or left behind its role and responsibility, I would say, for providing services, providing oversight of the needs of Americans living with a serious mental illness and children that live with serious emotional disturbance. So this is, in a sense, ISMIC is really intended to be a kind of a development and showcase for things that we're doing across the federal government and hope to stimulate by extension in states and local governments as well. So that's sort of my history lesson on ISMIC and context setting on ISMIC. Happy to answer any questions maybe toward the end, if that would be okay. I don't want to hold the agenda up too much. I would like to take a minute also in the second part of my remarks to brag just a little bit about some of the things that we in the Center for Mental Health Services are doing. So just to let you know a little bit about this. So first, I want to talk a little bit about, let's go on to the next slide, about CCBHCs. I believe that this group is aware of CCBHCs. CCBHCs are the Certified Community Behavioral Health Program, or CCBHCs. In my mind, and I know I'll be sounding like a broken record to many of you that have heard me speak about this, but in my mind, this is the first real shot that we've had as a country since the original vision was laid out by then President Kennedy, almost immediately before he was assassinated in 1963. This is the first real shot we've had at creating a national vision for, yes, people with serious mental illness and children with SED deserve to have access to a full range of services no matter where they live in the United States. And so the CCBHC model, which has been evolving now for 10, 15 years, is really coming to fruition and developing and growing across our country. We have hundreds and hundreds of CCBHC clinics now that conform to those standards. And as we speak, we're working more to support that. So this is a really important advancement for us. If you don't have a CCBHC in your neighborhood, I think I'm hoping there'll be a CCBHC coming to your neighborhood soon. CCBHCs provide 3 ways that I think about them sort of broadly. They provide better access to services through crisis and appointment time requirements for first intake after first contact. They provide a specific array of services, and they also provide recovery support and rehabilitation style services on the other end after the acute phase of treatment that they work with. So they are really what I say about CCBHCs, what you would want a family member of yours to experience or have access to if they had a serious mental illness or a serious emotional disturbance. They are not, by the way, only exclusively for that population, those individuals with that end of the spectrum, but they are certainly inclusive and squared on the needs of that with the range of services that they offer. And we do have some things that are happening in CCBHC land. David DeMorney would be happy to talk your ears off about any details that you have further questions about that. But one of the special things about some of the CCBHCs is the way they're paid for. And we're working very closely with CMS to assure that states in their state Medicaid plans have opportunities over time to participate in the funding mechanism that allows cost-based payment. Yes, I said cost-based payment, not just what we can afford, but what it actually costs to deliver the services. So that's a very important part and something that really is a important consideration for folks living with serious mental illnesses. Let's go on to the next slide. I just have a couple other slides that demonstrate a little bit about some of the ways that we do our work at SAMHSA. One of the things that we've been engaged with is a series of policy academies. Those are meetings that we have that help bring together teams, mostly from states, sometimes also from other communities, who come together during an immersion style experience and create a plan that they take back to the state with them. We've been concerned recently, for example, about the rising rate of suicide among Black youth. And last year had a very successful policy academy. We have seen quite a bit of activity as a result of the plans that were made from the, I believe it was 8 states that were convened in Baltimore last year. And we are planning to have another one of those for this coming year. Our staff, Brendan Johnson and Belina Shaw, and many others are involved in hosting those. We also are very engaged in the crisis enterprise. I know everyone here hopefully has heard of 988 and all the related activity that go with that. Our part of the crisis enterprise, it more relates to the services that come outside of the phone call itself. And so we have, for instance, our mental health block grant has a requirement that a certain amount of that money be used to support the development of crisis services. The mobile crisis services is what we see most commonly, but we also are increasingly seeing crisis receiving units as an alternative to emergency departments, which we know aren't always equipped. Our dream here is that that everyone across the United States can call 988 and get the level of service that they need, akin in some ways to the way that 911 works for us. It took us 60 years to develop and mature the 911 system. We've only been at this crisis full on this way for a couple years, and we really hope that if we have if we get a system that's developed over the next 10 to 15 years, we'll be doing that at a much faster rate than it took 911 to become so reliable. It's hard for us even to think about what life was like when you had to scramble to find a telephone number and hope you could find a telephone booth to call if you had an accident on the interstate, or if, heaven forbid, you should happen to see a bridge fall in the Chesapeake Bay. So give us a minute, but 988, we're actively developing the crisis services that support needs that go beyond or can't be addressed by a call. And this is an example of another policy academy that we have where we get together counties and have counties think about, from a population health perspective, their needs for crisis services, for access to crisis services across their county. This is coming up very soon. The next one of these, this is another one that we did last year, and we're repeating again this coming year. Let's go on to the next slide. Let's see. So this is not a CMHS program, but it's something that our staff have been involved in advising on. This is the Innovation in Behavioral Health Model, IBH it's called. I don't know how widespread knowledge is about this at this point. The CMMI, or Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the I in CMMI it's a subpart of CMS. I is for innovation. It's a special group of individuals that work in to promote innovation, and they've selected the topic to work on behavioral health. There is a model launch that's coming up this upcoming fall. We've looked over the NOFO, and it did go. I can't of course tell you details unless anyone here be interested in applying for it, but I can tell you it's designed to go up to 8 years. Up to 8 states will be able to participate, and the notice of funding will be coming out sometime in the next couple months. The next slide tells a little bit about what the IBH is. Basically, I think of it as very intentional case management elements. That it really helps to sort of, the target population would be individuals who have difficulty engaging in regular care and benefiting from the benefits of regular care. The basic model creates a safety net and a cooperative relationship with individuals to help them get the care they need and take advantage of the care they need to stay well, physically well, and also mentally well. So that's something that's on the horizon and will address the needs of individuals. As best we can tell, you could have an IBH model imported on top of a CCBHC. That's how it might work. You could also have an IBH model on a primary care type clinic. And this is just a little bit more about that. Let's see, as I conclude my remarks, I want to just let you know that we have two key staff here that have been very intensely involved. Dr. Belina Shaw, who is one of our senior medical advisors in the Center for Mental Health Services, and Mr. Joel Fuentes, who is a public health advisor. You've seen Joel and Belina working. I'll turn over to them at this point, but I want to go ahead while I've got the floor and express my gratitude for all the time and effort that's been put into these meetings, which now run very well, but for a meeting to run well takes a lot of background work. So thank you, Joel and Belina. And with that, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Everett, and thank you, Dr. Delphin Rittman, for your opening remarks and your kind words. We're very excited to continue to work with the ISMIC and excited about the new members. And also, I saw David Covington's mention in the chat. It's just really exciting for someone who has not been with the ISMIC since 2017 to go back to the original report and read those recommendations and see how so many of them have really blossomed, such as crisis care and continuum, as well as CCBHCs. So you can go to the next slide, Joel. But actually, the prior slide. Back one. I think there's one more. Thank you. Which.com. Yeah. So we have we have a report to Congress that has been well baked and is processing through, and you guys will see it as the non-federal and federal members simultaneously as soon as we finish up on the SAMHSA side. I'm really excited about it. The 2024 report to Congress, building on progress of federal action for a system that works for all people living with SMI and SED and their families and caregivers. And I know that we've asked for feedback from the federal members, and we're so thankful for that. And we've also asked for feedback through the working groups from the stewards as well. And I know that our federal agencies are also, and non-federal members are well engaged there. So we look forward to getting your feedback on this as we finalize this and get this out the door. But just wanted to say that, it's a major update from 2017 and 2024. And as you'll notice, next slide, please, that, there are some changes here, including some of the look of the ISMIC. The ISMIC is not SAMHSA. The ISMIC is not, specific to SAMHSA. So obviously SAMHSA, our primary color is blue, if you will, and you'll see a lot of our work has been thematically blue. But we thought, as far as the ISMIC, that the ISMIC should stand alone as its own PACA and really highlight the partnership of both our non-federal and federal members Based on the last group discussion, we discussed an emblem for the ISMIC, and you'll have already seen that displayed through this meeting. And just to provide feedback, and it's actually, we had another iteration based on the feedback from this group. And you'll see that there are now 2 rings, and they're purple to symbolize recovery, that outer ring there, as well as the inner ring. The inner ring within there, those 3 circles and semicircles are symbolic of figures or people in community, those people that are in community with themselves, but then also they are engaging with the other 5 outer rings around them. And then Joel go in the next slide about the symbolism of those 5 outer rings that are representative of our working groups.
Sure. Thanks, Belina. So as you can see, as we work to rebrand the ISMIC, we also place special emphasis on each of our 5 working groups, which really do, a bulk of the work and move forward the recommendations originally proposed in 2017. And so each of the colors of the rings corresponds to one of our working groups. And so as you can see, we have data and evaluation, we have finance, treatment and recovery, access and engagement, and criminal justice. And we really worked with our working group leads to encapsulate the work and make sure that it's represented in each icon. And as we produce products going forward, keeping this branding consistent throughout. And on that note, we will also be making edits to our website. So if you haven't visited our website already, there's a lot of helpful information about the structure of the ISMIC, our past reports to Congress, and a copy of our quarterly newsletter that went out in January 2024. And so this newsletter really has the latest and greatest of what's going on at the working group level, as well as at our meeting level. So as you can see, there's a screenshot of a group photo that we took during our last meeting in October. And this newsletter goes out to our membership. And as I mentioned, a copy of it goes up to our website as well. So you're welcome to peruse and kind of keep updated. And don't forget to check out our SAMHSA website as well, which has a variety of products relevant to the populations that we're discussing today, including some products that have come out of the work that we do here in the ISMIC. And lastly, I would like to be the first to let you know that we're excited to announce our fall meeting on October 29th, 2024, hopefully in person. We will keep you updated and we will make sure that our membership is aware of that. And so now for our favorite part of the meeting agenda, we would like to take a group photo. So I'll stop sharing and hopefully Pam and Belina, you can also help me by taking a screenshot, if you will. All right, so on the count of 3, everyone could smile and we can commemorate this in our products. So 1, 2, 3. Great, thank you all. Let me go back to our slide deck here. And so Belina, I will turn it back over to you to discuss the content of our agenda for today.
Thank you. I'll start out the frame and then turn it back over to Dr. Delphin Rittman to get us into the details of this meeting. But we have a couple of very exciting presentations today. And historically in these meetings, we've used them also to share information and highlight progress in addition to the working group work. So our 2 featured presentations will include a panel discussion that I'm personally very excited about hearing, the Olmsted decision, 25 years in the making. This will be a panel discussion and with a series of several panelists and thinking about, obviously commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Olmsted decision. But also not thinking about that from the perspective of only history, but the progress that's been made and the progress that we can continue to build upon. So we'll be hearing from of the Department of Justice and to really to ground us in that what that decision was and in its significance. And then we'll also be hearing from commissioners, former commissioners, and other people who have been involved in really thinking about how to make the services and supports for people with disabilities and behavioral disabilities better in this country and at the state level. And also thinking about for people from a person from lived experience and really feeling that tangible impact of of this work. And then we'll wrap it up with SAMHSA and HUD to talk about how what's going on in the government currently. So that's just we're going from the past to the present, history in the making. And then we'll also have a second presentation, and that will be focused on the SMI Advisor, one of our technical assistance centers, a modern approach to technical assistance that makes an impact. And I'm really excited for this. As a psychiatrist, I see SMI Advisor tracking me on Facebook and everywhere. Like they have done a great job in making sure that that the information is available to the people that need it to support practitioners in ensuring that people with SMI get the highest quality care and do not shy away from this population. And so I'm just very excited to hear about the work that's being done with SMI Advisor as well. Next slide. So I will turn it over to Dr. Delphine Rittman to give a description of the panelists themselves.
All right, so thank you so much. So we will have, again, the presentations, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions afterwards. So we'll begin our panel with presentation from Jennifer Mathis from the Department of Justice, who will provide some historical context surrounding the Olmsted decision. Jennifer Mathis currently serves within the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, where she supervises the Disability Rights section. And so Jennifer and Laura and Janine Wooden and Kimberly, I will turn the floor over to you all. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Happy to be here. So I will give a very brief background of the Olmsted case, and we'll talk a little bit about how it's been applied in different contexts and what it has meant for people with disabilities. And I will just say at the outset that Olmsted is widely considered, I think rightly so, to be the most significant case the Supreme Court has decided in how it impacts the lives of people with disabilities. The case itself involved two women with both intellectual disabilities and mental health disabilities who had been confined in one of Georgia's state psychiatric hospitals for pretty significant periods of time after they had been found ready for discharge. One of them, Lois Curtis, had been in the hospital for 3 years after she was found ready for discharge, and the other, Elaine Wilson, had been there for about 2 years after she was first found ready for discharge. At the time, the women were known as LC and EW, but they later went public with their names of Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson. I saw that David Covington had put in the chat the Lois Curtis case, and that was, that Tommy Olmsted actually was the Georgia Mental Health Commissioner, and people had at the time tried to make some effort to memorialize the case by reference to the plaintiffs, Lois and Elaine, although it didn't seem to stick as much as Olmsted did. But in any event, Ms. Curtis and Ms. Wilson brought a claim under the ADA's so-called integration mandate, which provides that state and local governments must administer their services to people with disabilities in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. So the issue of unnecessary institutionalization and segregation was an issue that people with disabilities had really been trying to get at for many years. It was a major concern that Congress had discussed in the legislative history of the ADA. And in the years before the ADA was passed, people had brought similar legal claims under the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and under the Developmental Disabilities Bill of Rights Act. But those claims didn't get the same traction in the end as claims that were brought under the ADA. So in the Olmsted case, the Supreme Court held that unnecessary institutionalization of people with disabilities is a form of discrimination that's covered by the ADA. Georgia had said, we're not discriminating simply by asking these women to wait to get out of the hospital, even if that would take years, because the state didn't have enough community services. They said, we're not denying services, we're just asking them to wait. And Georgia also said that it couldn't be discrimination to deny Lois and Elaine community-based services of the sort that were only for people with disabilities. So Georgia said, how can it be unequal treatment when people without disabilities aren't seeking or receiving these kinds of services? It's only for people with disabilities. The Supreme Court disagreed and said, keeping people with disabilities in an institution when they didn't need to be there is a form of discrimination that's covered by the ADA. And they said this for two reasons. First, because unnecessarily segregating people in those types of settings curtails everyday activities, including work, educational opportunities, economic independence, family relations, social and cultural opportunities. But secondly, and I think this is really significant, the court said that confining people to these settings when they didn't need to be there perpetuated unfounded assumptions that people with disabilities are incapable or unworthy of participating in community life. And that recognition is borne out, I would say, by our experience time and again, that when service systems function a certain way for a long time, it's hard to undo those assumptions that become ingrained in the system, that if you look like this, if you have this set of needs, then you belong in this kind of place. And those assumptions are really at the heart of why the ADA was passed and the protections that it provides. It's exactly those types of unfounded assumptions about the capabilities of people with disabilities that the ADA was meant to address. I want to talk a little bit about some of our recent work at the Justice Department to enforce the integration mandate, as it shows the breadth of how that mandate applies, including to living settings, but also to employment services, to education, to the intersection of mental health and criminal justice systems. In the last couple of years, we've issued several findings letters, for example, concerning the unnecessary institutionalization of children with mental health disabilities, in Maine, in Nevada, and in Alaska. We found that these states were violating the ADA's integration mandate by failing to provide the intensive home and community-based services needed by children and youth with mental health disabilities, resulting in their needless institutionalization in psychiatric hospitals, residential treatment centers, and in some cases, juvenile justice facilities, often out of state, hundreds of miles away from their families. And in the case of Alaska, obviously thousands of miles away. We've been in discussions with those states to resolve those matters. Similarly, we've been in discussions with South Carolina to try to resolve findings that South Carolina is violating the integration mandate by needlessly serving adults with serious mental illness in adult homes or residential care facilities. We have current litigation in Georgia that involves children with mental health with a broad range of disabilities, actually, who are being educated in segregated classrooms and segregated schools due to the lack of services to support them in classrooms alongside non-disabled peers. So that's Olmstead is applied to education. And we were also working to resolve findings that Alabama violated the integration mandate by relegating hundreds of students with emotional and behavioral disabilities in the foster care system to segregated and inferior educational programs on the campuses of psychiatric residential treatment facilities. We recently ended a longstanding settlement agreement that resolved a challenge to Oregon's provision of segregated employment services to people with disabilities, and we continue to work with Rhode Island to implement a similar settlement agreement requiring the state to provide services to support people in securing competitive integrated employment. Those cases involve people with intellectual disabilities, but we are also looking at employment and day services for people with psychiatric disabilities. And last year, we issued a guidance concerning Olmstead's application to employment and day services, including for people with psychiatric disabilities. Some of our recent work has addressed the unavailability of community mental health services, leading to unnecessary institutionalization, as well as avoidable contact with the criminal justice system. So last year, we entered a settlement with Alameda County, California, to resolve allegations that the county's failure to provide sufficient community-based services and housing resulted in the needless hospitalization and incarceration of people with serious mental illness in the county psychiatric hospital and the county jail. We also have investigations looking at how states' failure to provide community services may be leading to unnecessary law enforcement encounters in addition to unnecessary institutionalization. So those investigations, Kentucky and Oklahoma, are related to matters we have involving local jurisdictions over reliance on law enforcement responders rather than mental health responders to address mental health emergency calls where appropriate. That gives you some sense of the breadth and significance of the ADA's integration mandate applied to all of these different contexts. And to close, I just want to emphasize that Olmsted has been such an important tool because so many of the problems that we have in our current mental health systems really have at their root the insufficient availability and access to community-based services. I haven't talked much about the implementation of Olmsted settlements, but that work has shown clearly in case after case the direct relationship between community services and the need for institutional beds. So while those settlements have not required institutions to downsize, the community services that they developed had the impact of dramatically decreasing institutional admissions and institutional census. It's important to recognize that relationship. In Delaware, it's just one example, the state hospital census decreased by more than 40% as a result of the Olmsted settlement creation of the set of community services that people needed to avoid hospitalization. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to the next person, but happy to be here and happy to answer questions at the end.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation and just for your really, really important work in this area. So next we'll be hearing from Judy Fitzgerald. Judy, thanks so much for being with us and so good to see you. Judy Fitzgerald is a former commissioner of the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities and is a staunch advocate for mental health needs of children and youth. As a social worker by trade, she brings over 2 decades of experience in behavioral health and public service systems. She plans to share her experience with her efforts to develop a behavioral health services in Georgia in response to Olmsted settlement, and will pose some questions and possible approaches to addressing concerns surrounding Olmsted decision in communities in the future. Today, she'll be speaking solely as an individual, not representing an organizational or a governmental viewpoint. So Judy, happy to turn the floor over to you, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much. It's really a privilege to be here this morning with all of you. Thank you for the opportunity. Because I'm speaking to you as an individual today, I'm just going to take a minute and share a little bit about my background. Because the comments I want to offer really are a reflection of, as the Assistant Secretary said, really decades of experience. So I have a master's in social work, and my first job out of graduate school was working for former First Lady Rosalind Carter, who I consider to be one of the greatest advocates of our community and really prescient in her commitment to both caregiving and mental health parity. So doesn't she look really smart now, all these years later? Following my time at the Carter Center, I was the executive director of a statewide advocacy organization. I moved from there to be a chief strategy officer at a large community-based public safety net provider. And then how I came to know many of you is I served the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities for 10 years, 6 years of which I served as commissioner. I've also done some consulting with a federally qualified health center around their behavioral health services. I tell you all of this, you may already come to the conclusion that I have a hard time keeping a job. But really, what you might also really take away is that I'm coming to you today with multiple perspectives on delivery systems and people of all levels of ability and need. I want to share one other aspect of my background, which shapes my perspective here almost as much as anything else, which is that I serve as the healthcare guardian for my adult sister who lives in New York, who is a resilient, strong-willed, very loving person with profound intellectual, developmental, and physical disabilities. So I bring a family perspective as well. This collection of decades of both personal and professional experience leads me to tell you I hardly see anything in black and white anymore. And today I'm going to sit a little bit in that, some of the nuance that you all are wrestling with in the work that you do. So in thinking about what could I offer this esteemed group, you guys are thinking the big things, really trying to move the needle at a national level. And I just want to say thank you for what I'm guessing may be thankless service and work. I know the ways in which moving these mountains behind the scenes really can have impact. So I wish that I was coming to you today with a clear vision of the pathway ahead for Olmsted, but I'm not. What I am going to offer are 3 observations and maybe 3 questions or 3 challenges for you based on that breadth of experience that I've had. And I'm sure it's not lost on you all that I am dialing in here from Georgia, the home of Elaine Wilson and Lois Curtis, which is a big, diverse state with tremendous need that has not yet expanded Medicaid, and is also the owner of a comprehensive Olmsted settlement agreement that was originally crafted in 2010 and rewritten in 2016, addressing both adults with serious mental illness and intellectual and developmental disabilities, and that is still in place. So, in the time I have, I'll just plant some seeds here. So I said first, 3 observations. Observation number 1, Olmsted transforms lives. Unquestionably, immeasurably, it's one of the most important successes of the civil rights movement. As an advocate, I experienced true joy when the Olmsted Settlement Agreement was signed in our state in 2010. The litigation, as Jennifer has really pointed to, brought more money, focus, attention, and awareness, and completely changed the conversation in our state about the need for community-based services of care and across the disability continuum. It really was revolutionary. Okay, now are you ready for observation number 2? I believe this same settlement agreement now limits progress in our state. So I hope with me, you will be those people that can hold 2 opposite things to be true. And I could say a lot more about this, but first and foremost, I want to just acknowledge the history here in Georgia. Because the settlement agreement was deemed so comprehensive, it currently stands as the state's Olmsted Plan. So for practical purposes, a legal agreement that focuses on the highest level of need with very prescriptive language that does not include children is really de facto our Olmsted Plan. And I think, in my opinion, which is why I'm speaking personally and individually today, this falls way short of what the intent of Olmsted is. And equally important, if you think about a document that was written originally in 2010, or even updated to some degree in 2016, let me ask each of you, when you think about system delivery reform, do you take the same lens that you did in 2010 or 2016? So I think this represents a real challenge to progress in the future. And an example of how sometimes we can lose the forest through the trees when what we're relying on only is rigid legal accountability in a delivery system that operates in a very dynamic healthcare environment. Final observation. I've been listening in preparation really for talking to all of you, listening to a lot of Olmsted conversations around the country. And I hope to not sound too defensive, but I will say that a common theme in all of these is the story of Olmsted is the story of state as bad actors. And in defense of folks toiling away all around our country, I do want to say this is not my experience, not by a long shot. More importantly, I don't think this is a helpful starting point for meaningful dialogue about integration and innovation. If we're really asking the question, what can communities, states, and service delivery systems do better? Okay, so those were my observations. I said I'd have 3 challenges or questions for you. And given my observations, you're not going to be surprised. I really have a plea just for more nuance in our approach to thinking about how do we accelerate the impact of this really earth-shattering agreement. And I hope, my plea to all of you is that we'll be open-minded enough to consider that increased legal enforcement is not the only tool for progress. It may be true that Olmsted as a Supreme Court decision is the greatest win we ever got. But I think we're shortchanging its power if we limit our ideas to progress and always report that progress as defined only through a legal lens. So the ask, the question, the challenge, can we paint with a finer brush than a right way and a wrong way to do things as defined only by the courts? In my experience working for the state, I probably spent as much time listening to clever legal maneuvering as I did about real, meaningful, community-based system reform. No disrespect to the great legal minds that are on this call and all around the country and care deeply. But I really, my second challenge is to think about revolutionary change in a healthcare delivery system that is not just bound by legal language. And I just challenge us all to think about how far we've come in our understanding of health disparities, the role of crisis services, the opioid epidemic and substance use disorder, the importance of thinking about our post-COVID economic and social realities. We've got workforce realities that go along with that, and of course, opportunities like CCBHC and investments in social determinants of health. And I think making sure we have Olmsted conversations that really look to these future elements is critical. So I really want to encourage all of us to think about, developing those community-based service delivery systems. And we talk about making those choices available. But my experience has been, we need to think more about not just informed choice, but how we actually, not just how the choices are available in the community, but how we talk to people, how we help people make real decisions in the real worlds that exist. And, I've come to think about, a hope that there would be more emphasis, I hear a lot about informed consent and informed choice. What my experience is that professionals, administrators, and others need more help with informed listening. My final, I think, question and challenge here is really to ask this deeper question. Are we really listening? We have more work to do here, and I think the feds can help with simplifying their language. And it's the work ISMIC is really charged with, and I know that you are trying to do and thinking about ways to align the levers. If you really believe, as I do, that states and local communities are the incubators, we've got to find more ways to get out of their way and allow pilots and innovation and incubation really to happen. So I don't have the answers, but I do know that the questions and deeper thinking about what next is going to start with the voice of lived experience. And finding more meaningful ways to lift that up is easy to say, but really hard to do. And I will leave with you the biggest challenge that I received in 2023, because I consider myself in every role I've had to be an advocate and an ally. But I was really challenged to think maybe it's not enough to be an ally. What would you do if you were a co-conspirator? And what are you willing to put on the line in the work that you do? So I think about that challenge each day when I wake up. What would a co-conspirator do? And I encourage you to do the same as you sit in these really important seats, thinking about how to make a difference. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this morning.
Great. Thank you so much, Judy, for being with us and for sharing your insights and experiences and for putting forward those questions of challenge and encouraging us really to sit with that nuance and sit with that challenge. So appreciate your perspectives. So next we'll be hearing from Laura Bentosh. And Laura is an individual with lived experience who has held policy positions at the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, the University of Maryland, and at the State Oregon Health Authority. She is the founder of Mental Health Policy Roundtable. Her work is born from her experience as a patient turned activist, and she's been involved in the peer movement since 1985. She's widely recognized from her leadership in advancing the recovery and rights of people with mental health and trauma-related challenges across the nation. Ms. Bentosh will share her experiences and her perspectives of the impact of the Olmstead decision on the behavioral health landscape and what impact the decision has on personal level as well. So Laura, happy to turn the floor over to you now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Delphine Rittman, and I may get the prize for being awake the earliest. I got up at 4:30. I'm on the Pacific Coast, and the fear of God woke me up at 4:30 instead of 5 to make sure that I got here on time. So it's a pleasure to be with you all. Yes, I can make a 9 a.m. meeting on the East Coast. That's the answer to my question, has been that. So I'm grateful to be here. Olmstead is a decision that is woven into my body and my mind. I was extremely grateful when I heard the words of the former, God rest her soul, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, read the decision that she led on Olmstead. And I did, by way of information, put a link in the chat that directs you to the actual audio of her reading the decision. So when you click on that link, maybe do that at the coffee break. It's very well done. It's an excellent website. And I move people towards that link to really hear, in a way, a kind of an understated passion that she had around the values that Olmstead represents. And I was moved to tears when I first heard her read the statement that again came out, the majority decision that she was able to read and get recorded. So please do listen to that. I want to say that 25 years in the making, that was really the title here for Olmstead. And I had to use my calculator, but 25 years ago was 1999. And that was the year that the Surgeon General's report on mental health was issued, which all of you probably are familiar with. And if not, that also is on the internet. It's a little difficult to find, actually, but it is there, and it's an incredibly important document. So really what was happening in our field 25 years ago was this marriage of policy at a macro level that really has continued to drive our service systems even up until today. It was, and it's been said, Judy made mention of this as well, that the Olmstead decision is the most important civil rights decision in our country's history. I never really knew that, but that's actually mentioned in a number of the important websites that are dedicated to the Olmsted work and decision and history. There's Olmsted, I think it's olmstedrights.org, but that's also on the internet there, and you can look that up. So again, there was this kind of, again, this important policy that was affecting us nationwide. And over 25 years, there has been systemic improvement and kind of incremental improvement, which I am really happy that Jennifer Mathis was able to outline some of the key decisions that have come through the Justice Department into our field, helping us to move the decision forward and have it be the law of the land. Quite frankly, it's a little frustrating to hear the number of cases that the Justice Department has been engaged in, because we're talking about a nationwide policy that is certainly not yet nationally adhered to by states and local governments. And in fact, when I moved back to Washington State, which is where I live in Seattle now, from the state of Oregon, I didn't know, but our Olmsted plan, which is required by the federal government actually, has not been updated in many, many years here in Washington State. And in fact, public officials, heads of departments, such as the RHHS, basically department, commissioner stated publicly that we are out of compliance with the Olmsted planning process and have been. And it's sort of like this badge of honor that, okay, we didn't have to do that state plan, but honestly, that plan is really supposed to be a roadmap for implementation. And we're missing that piece that really could be driving our state a little bit more fervently in developing state and local policy. What we have now, I just want to say that there's, benefits that Judy clearly discussed in her remarks, and crisis care centers are now going to be a part of King County, which is the largest county in the state where Seattle is located. And we're creating 5 crisis care centers through a voter approved levy that went through in April of last year. And so there's an implementation plan now waiting at our county council for approval before these 5 centers get where RFPs will be issued, and there'll be, I guess, a lot of fever in terms of applying for these RFPs to create these crisis environments. And again, as you know, crisis care is crucial. Excellent implementation is to help prevent people from being institutionalized in either emergency rooms, acute care units, and then obviously state-run facilities, which is where the commitment law comes into play, and more people are getting committed when we really need these alternatives within our system. It's difficult to really talk about all of this in the few minutes that I have, and just 1 second, please. I take medication. That's really difficult here with dry mouth, so excuse me. But we really are in need of developing these alternative services that are necessary for full-fledged community integration. And that's where the planning processes, I think, could benefit our planning and our implementation of services. In addition to that, I think this is because of the time that we're in. And as you know, California voters approved, not overwhelmingly, but approved Proposition 1, which is a big systems change effort there, and a lot of dynamics. So I'm not going to go into specific detail, but in California and elsewhere, including in Washington State, there have been attempts to create legislation to remove people from the street and have people go into state institutions, or thinking that that's an answer to address this problem. And quite frankly, we don't, really know the impact of these laws. They have not yet been fully implemented. But my concern is that we will be putting away people that basically are unsightly and affecting our commerce and having an overall impact on our quality of life, to then be reinstitutionalized in settings, including jails. I might add, thinking that that's a benefit that we're providing to people when I think we're going back in time instead of forward. This is where I think the 25-year mark is crucial for us to stop momentarily and take stock of where we've been and where we're headed. And I want to conclude by thanking SAMHSA and many other federal institutions, I might add, who have worked really hard to expand alternative services. Your messaging, SAMHSA, on social media is really about community integration, if you really read between the lines. And then I wonder how we're measuring up with some of the policies that we're moving forward with that clearly are not evidence-based, but also restrictive. And so I wonder how we're measuring up there and how we can kind of clarify those different directions that SAMHSA is taking. I want to thank the Office of Recovery, which is a peer-led department within SAMHSA, for putting my name forward to speak today. Peer support is clearly back in the news like it was in 1999. And peer support is now becoming a really key area for improving our workforce and also promoting the value of recovery that peers hold dear to their hearts. So I'm very excited about having a brief dialogue if we can. Otherwise, I'm available on LinkedIn or Facebook. And thank you all very much for what you're doing with ISMIC, and appreciate the time for today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here and for sharing your perspectives. I really appreciate especially even getting up early to be with us. So thank you. And so now, as we proceed sort of exploring Olmsted history in the making, next we'll be turning the panel over to a representative from government. We know that housing supports have been really central in these cases, and so we want to share some of the current work happening that the federal government is doing to help communities meet the needs of individuals with serious and persistent mental illness. Our first presentation will be from Jeannie Warden from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Jeannie Warden is the Associate General Counsel for Fair Housing in HUD, where she manages enforcement of Fair Housing Act, the Rehabilitation Act, and Title II of the American with Disabilities Act. Before joining HUD in 2011, she managed enforcement of these laws at the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. And so, Jeannie, happy to turn the floor over to you now.
Thank you so much. It is a real privilege for me to be able to talk to you today about Olmsted and the past 25 years. I've had the privilege of working at the intersection of civil rights law, disability rights law, and housing during that time period. And there have been a lot of changes. And I'd like to talk to you about those changes through the lens of housing. Making Olmsted a reality really means enabling individuals with disabilities, all types of disabilities, including serious mental illness, to live in community settings and receive the disability-related supports and services they need, and to participate in the community broadly and really enjoy life in the same way that people without disabilities enjoy life. And so one of the major obstacles to realizing the full promise of Olmsted is the lack of affordable housing. And today there's a great recognition that there is a serious lack of affordable housing in this country. HUD is, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is the federal agency that really plays a key role in housing, and it plays two key roles in connection with Olmsted implementation. First, HUD funds a lot of the affordable housing in this nation, including the affordable housing that serves individuals with disabilities in integrated settings. Second, HUD, through our Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, enforces fair housing and civil rights laws. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the progression in both of those areas during the past 25 years, and maybe give a little peek under the hood about what we expect to see coming. So there's tension between HUD's two roles as the funder of housing and as the enforcer of civil rights in the housing context. The housing models that HUD has traditionally funded have included models including group homes, sometimes large group homes, single site facilities serving individuals with serious mental illness and intellectual disabilities. But HUD also serves the public at large with various models of housing, including public housing, housing choice vouchers, and coming to terms with Olmsted in the housing models that HUD offers was one of the major changes that has occurred over the past 25 years. In the early 2000s, when we were talking about enforcing the rights of individuals with disabilities in housing, we were really talking about doing enforcement actions against state and local governments relating to zoning laws that prohibited group homes and other types of facilities that provided housing and services to individuals with disabilities from being placed in community settings. Okay, that fight is not over. We're still doing that today, but that was really the focus of housing rights for individuals with disabilities 25 years ago. In 2004, I think we took a major step forward at HUD and the Department of Justice. We issued a little piece of guidance called the Joint Statement on Reasonable Accommodations under the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act is the law that really governs and prohibits housing discrimination across the United States on the basis of disability, race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, etc. It's really what guarantees equal opportunity in housing across the country. And in 2004, HUD and the Department of Justice came together and made some important statements about housing. First, we said that under the Fair Housing Act, you do not get to exclude individuals with disabilities from the housing that you operate. And that includes housing that's assisted with HUD funds, and it means private housing, housing that everyone across the United States lives in. And it means large landlords and small landlords. We also said that it's not appropriate to deny housing to people with disabilities because you think they may be threatening. And this is a really important statement in the context of serious mental illness. HUD and the Department of Justice together made clear that you can't deny housing on the basis of stereotypes and fears. You actually must make decisions that enable individuals with disabilities to be able to access housing in community settings, all types of housing. And since individuals with disabilities may need services and supports in their housing, you can't require them to be able to live independently without services and supports that they need, and you must make reasonable accommodations in housing, including in HUD-assisted housing, accommodations for live-in aids, and accommodation for the receipt of services in other ways. Step a little bit forward to 2014, and HUD issued a statement regarding Olmsted. And this is a really important piece of HUD history in the housing context, because we talked about the importance of housing and the role of advancing Olmsted, the goals of Olmsted. And in this document, we talked about the rights of individuals with disabilities in the housing programs that HUD funds. So we made some important statements. We said that individuals with disabilities have the right to live and interact with individuals without disabilities to the fullest extent possible. We said that individuals with disabilities deserve and have the right to have autonomy and make choices in their life. They in the housing that HUD provides through its funding mechanisms, there needs to be the option to make choices in daily life about who people interact with and what types of meals they eat and when they eat and what friends they have over. And this was a major statement in 2014 during the Obama administration that posed some challenges for the older housing models that HUD has funded traditionally over the years. Step forward to 2016, and we issued guidance making clear that violations of the Fair Housing Act can occur when housing providers focus too much on how an individual has had contact with the criminal justice system, and that using screening criteria such as arrests or convictions that relate to crimes that don't involve safety really should not play a role in decision-making about who is able to access housing. And we also tackled the issue of nuisance ordinances. As Laura just talked about, we have seen some trends where individuals with disabilities, particularly individuals with serious mental illness, are beginning again to be seen as threats in the community. And so some communities have decided to address those issues by enacting nuisance ordinances. And a nuisance ordinance is a law that says if an individual calls 911 too much for services, then they're a nuisance in the community, and the community can require a landlord to evict them. Or if a person has any involvement with the criminal justice system, the community has the right to reach out to the landlord and require the landlord to evict them. So back in 2016, we made our clear statement that nuisance ordinances can violate the Fair Housing Act and discriminate on the basis of race, national origin, and in particular disability. So let's move forward to the current day and what HUD is beginning to tackle right now. We are currently working to tackle the barriers that still exist in HUD housing programs for individuals with disabilities who have had contact with the criminal justice system. We are working to improve the coordination between the Medicaid programs across the country and the housing, the affordable housing programs across the country, so that when someone's ready to leave an institutional setting, their housing can be available together with the services and supports that are needed. Unfortunately, the housing models haven't always been developed to work jointly with the Medicaid services models. And we still have a lot of work to do in that area. And one of our focuses right now is on a housing voucher system called the Mainstream voucher system. And these are vouchers that are specifically targeted for individuals with disabilities to be able to access housing. Coordinating, we are currently working hard to coordinate with HHS to bring the services that individuals with serious mental illness need in order to live in the community setting in an apartment like anyone else. Other areas we are tackling are barriers in HUD's own program relating to contacts that individuals may have had with the criminal justice system. And truly important area, our recently retired Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Marcia Fudge, announced this initiative last year. And April upcoming is Fair Housing Month, the anniversary of when the Fair Housing Act became law. And we hope you will be seeing something soon in the area of removing additional barriers in housing relating to justice system involvement. And finally, the other thing that we hope you're going to be seeing soon is guidance from HUD on the issue of what it means to affirmatively further fair housing. Our fair housing law in the United States requires the entities that HUD funds and other federal agencies fund to work together to provide housing that works for people, doesn't discriminate against people, and that includes individuals with serious mental illness. And so one of the things that we hope you'll be seeing fairly shortly, maybe even celebrating Fair Housing Month, will relate to how local governments and state governments use their funding in the context of housing for individuals with disabilities, and putting forward a process where input is needed from individuals with lived experience, including individuals with serious mental illness, in figuring out the planning going forward for how housing and community-based services will be provided to meet the needs of individuals and communities across the United States. It's a pleasure for me to talk to you about this, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, Janine, and really, really appreciate your perspectives and partnership. And certainly, I think your presentation is a real reflection of sort of the value that we have in our partnership. And so really appreciate your sharing today. So finally, we'll be hearing from Kimberly Reynolds, who leads our Olmsted portfolio and work here at SAMHSA. So Kimberly will be sharing about just a range of Olmsted related activities and work happening here at SAMHSA. Kim is a public health advisor in the Center for Mental Health Services, Office of Policy Coordination and Innovation, where she focuses on the intersection of mental health and aging and/or disability, and leads initiatives related to Olmsted's Supreme Court decision. So Kim, happy to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Dr. Delphine-Rittman. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the initiatives that SAMHSA is currently undertaking regarding Olmsted and community integration. Go to the next slide. So some of the initiatives are funded by the state TA contract, and they build upon previous work that was done during the last state TA contract that ended in 2018. Its Olmsted-related work was informed by several groups of experts who met to provide overall project guidance and specifically to develop and implement a tool that states could use to assess themselves related to community integration. Once the pilot of that tool was implemented, SAMHSA sponsored a community of practice to enable states to apply this tool. They also provided webinars and other resources to support that piloting and implementation. So the work of the current contract task is to build upon that one through identifying current issues facing states and territories working to promote community integration for people with SMI or SED, then revise the tool accordingly and provide resources and supports for states as they begin to use the updated tool. Next slide. So to provide us with input on our contract tasks, we've assembled an 8-member technical expert panel of the individuals that you see listed on the slide. Next slide. And to inform the TEP and state behavioral health authorities, as well as other stakeholders, we've asked our contractor to put together a report concerning all cases on the DOJ docket related to Olmsted that involved individuals with SMIs or SED since the previous contract ended in 2018. That report is updated annually, and it's actually currently under revision for inclusion of new cases and changes to existing cases that have occurred over the past year. As I mentioned, much of the Olmsted-related contract work is related to an update of the 10-year-old Community Integration Self-Assessment Tool, or CISA tool. The existing tool is divided into 2 parts. The first, it provides contextual information through gathering qualitative data that helps states identify and better understand trends related to service delivery and state Olmsted activities. And then the second part of the tool asks detailed quantitative questions about 7 domains: financing and resources, movement to the community and recidivism, housing, community capacity, well-being, at-risk populations, and policy. So the TEP, the Technical Expert Panel, recognizing that the tool was 10 years old, and that there have been many changes to the community mental health and related systems, recommended that we gather feedback about needed updates from a number of groups that you see listed on the slide, including individuals with lived experience and families. We have gathered input from multiple federal agencies as well, SAMHSA staff too, and from the TEP themselves. Some of that feedback involves collecting additional data on particular populations, such as justice-involved individuals, youth, older adults, while other feedback involves updates to include services such as CCBHCs and states' crisis response systems. Some have discussed capturing data at local levels. Some feedback is about identifying what partnerships exist with other state agencies. Some have recommended additional attention to service quality, demand for services, use of evidence-based practices, and to the timeliness of service availability. There is a recognition that some cross-cutting topics, such as financing, input from individuals with lived experience and their families, and issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, should be added to all of the domains. And there have been recommendations to define terms such as those for specific services, settings, and populations so that they aren't interpreted differently by different states. As we begin to examine these recommendations, we've been mindful that what was already a substantial tool is likely to become longer and more complex. So the revised tool will have the option for states to prioritize a particular domain or domains to start with, to focus on through the use of some type as yet undeveloped decision tree type of resource. So we plan to begin piloting some of these domains in the next year, and to assist the states who participate, we will be developing webinars and other resources to support them. Next slide. So in addition to the CISA tool revision and the DOJ docket report, we've also developed a report on approaches that states can consider implementing to address workforce recruitment and retention so as to help ensure that individuals with SMI and SED are supported in their homes and communities. This report is in final clearance and should be released shortly. To help share the information that's contained in the report, we're also planning a webinar to summarize the findings in the report and to provide more in-depth profiles of state strategies. The date for that webinar has not yet been set, but it's going to be part of SAMHSA's activities to recognize the 25th anniversary of the Olmsted Supreme Court decision. So it will be likely scheduled sometime in June. Next slide, please. The final activity related to the contract is a monthly review of any newly published Olmsted resources that might be of value for state behavioral health authorities and other stakeholders. So on this webpage of SAMHSA's website, we list the federal and national resources, as well as links to individual states' Olmsted plans. And like I said, this is then updated monthly with any new resources. Next slide, please. In addition to our contract-related activities, we have a group of staff from pretty much every center and office who participate in a cross-SAMHSA Olmsted work group. Several of us also participate in a monthly Olmsted interagency coordination meeting of federal partners led by OCR. And as I already mentioned, in recognition of the 25th anniversary of Olmsted, we're planning several activities, including the webinar related to the workforce report, an additional webinar that discusses where we've been as a nation with regard to community integration and about the progress that we've made. We're also working with other HHS operating divisions to plan a cross HHS recognition event. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you.
All right, goodness, I'm having trouble getting off mute there. So thank you so much for each of those presentations, and really appreciate just the sort of looking at a number of different scenarios and examples in which we've been sort of thinking with and really grappling with Olmsted as an important area of sort of system, system change and system decision making. Why don't we go ahead? We're scheduled for a break, but I think it'd be good to have a little bit of time for discussion. Why don't we do like maybe 10 minutes of discussion, and then we'll go ahead and do a break. I think we'll also probably get pickup time at the end as well, because I don't think we don't usually use the full public comment period. So we'll have opportunity for discussion there as well. But did want to just open up the floor, because I think our presenters pose just a number of question areas, a number of areas for us to sort of think through and grapple with as a committee. And then I see a chat or comments in the chat also beginning to bubble up around sort of competency restoration and how we think about that within this context as well. So happy to open up the floor to anyone that has questions, or anyone that even added in some comments in the chat. I know, Brian, it looks like you had some comments as well as others.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, I think the panel has been really good, so thank you. And coming at it from a number of different angles, so I really appreciate that. It made me think about the whole competency issue, which if you're involved in the states at all, you know that competency is driving the number of admissions that are going into state hospitals. So that's really where the driver right now is for institutionalization. And I think 988 and crisis services goes a long ways to helping that, to work with law enforcement to keep people in the community. But until that really has full impact, I was wondering, is there a way to work with the judges across the country to see if there's another way to deal with this issue? Many times the judges are just overwhelmed. They're getting all these individuals with behavioral health issues, and they're trying to make a difference. Unfortunately, they often make the wrong decision by using competency as a way of getting somebody evaluated. And their goal is to get them into services, same as ours. It's just doing it in a way that really, it's having a terrible impact on the system. So my question is, as part of the Olmsted effort, is there any thought about working with the judges, given that that's a major driver on institutionalization? And I know that you have other people on the call that are much more knowledgeable than me on this issue, and I'm sure that they have a position on this. And it would be good to hear from them as well. But thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Brian. And, it is an area, certainly where we do have some connections and collaborations with judges on the SUD side. So I think there is a natural potential mechanism there. We have a collaboration with Chief State Justices, around opioid use disorder and sort of treatment, getting people connected to needed medication for opioid use disorder. But Anita or Kim, have there been any discussion around expanding some of that work or connecting with justices, particularly through some of our diversion or other initiatives, but really this is more around the competency piece?
Yeah, we do. I mean, of course, our Gain Center has a lot of resources that relate to that, and we've had recent policy academies related to that. So we're doing that level of work, and we also have are working with through Joe Bullock in a policy lab staff, working with a series of things. And Judge Leifman and us have been talking a little bit about some of what we might be able to do to look at training curricula for judges, so that there's more awareness of alternatives to expensive inpatient care all along the way in the steps of competency to stand trial as well as competency restoration. We know that's a big issue.
Yeah, and one that certainly is beginning to come up more. And so I think there's real opportunity there. Catherine, and then Judge Leifman.
Thank you. I'm, by way of introduction, I'm the medical director for the California State Hospital System, which is 6,500 beds, most of which now are forensic, and most of which now are admitting people who've been found incompetent to stand trial on a felony charge. And we're overwhelmed, as are the county jails in California, with people who have serious mental illnesses being arrested because they're unhoused and untreated. So 2/3 of the individuals that we're admitting were unhoused at the time of their arrest, and half were not receiving any Medi-Cal reimbursable mental health services prior to their arrest. So we are seeing this reinstitutionalization happen, overwhelming not just our institutions, but our state prisons and county jails as well. And I would love nothing more than to empty our institutions. I don't work there because I love institutions. I work there because that's where all the patients with serious mental illness are. And so I'm wondering, to Judy's point about nuance, is there a way to utilize Olmstead or restructure an approach to Olmstead that would target the drivers of this reinstitutionalization, which is this forensic commitment? And I also just want to point out that the forensic commitment, which we spend $2 to $3 billion on a year in California, does nothing to interrupt the trajectory of a person's mental health course. We simply medicate people long enough so that they can tell us what a judge is and what a plea bargain is and cooperate with their attorney. And then we shoot them right back out to the same circumstances that precipitated their arrest. 70% recidivate within 3 years. So if there is some way to retool or think about Olmstead to target what's actually driving crisis for people with SMI, I think that would be extremely beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments there, Catherine. And I don't know if anyone else has any follow-up related to that in terms of sort of retooling or thinking about Olmstead. Judge Leifman, I do see your hand up as well.
Thank you. And first, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Kate, for bringing this issue up, because it's a huge issue. And Brian can correct me, but I think there's about 16 states that are being sued by the federal government on this issue right now. And the state's responses are basically to either try to build more capacity or to allow for competency restoration in jail, which is only going to make the matters worse. Judges are frustrated because there is a lack of alternatives in the community. And so I will tell you, competency restoration gets used as a weak alternative because they don't know what else to do with this population, and nothing changes it. In a study we did in Florida, about 70% of the individuals who go through restoration, which cost my state about 25% of its entire adult mental health budget for about 3,500 people, Three things happen to them. The charges get dropped, they get credit for time served for the time they spent in the hospital, or they get put on probation. And under all three scenarios, they leave the courthouse without any access to treatment. And to Kate's point, they come right back, sometimes before they hit the parking lot, because they're still pretty sick and they're just really not getting what they need. And on a positive note, the Conference of Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators has put together 4 or 5 work groups on some of these related issues, one specifically on competency. We had our first meeting yesterday, and we're looking at ideas on what we can do, and we would love to work with all of you on this, developing kind of model competency restoration laws so that we're narrowing the use of competency to people that actually need to go to prison and stop trying to restore people charged with misdemeanors or low-level offenses because it accomplishes absolutely nothing and costs tremendous amount of dollars. But it's not about fixing competency per se. That's part of it. But part of the bigger issue, and I would love to see how we could use Olmsted, and Jennifer's presentation was tremendous. And so I would love to hear from her next, but it's really about reducing the number of people coming into the criminal system so we don't have to go to a restoration process, and starting to set up diversion systems, both pre and post arrest, and diversion from competency restoration. And I think that would help us. And I'd love to see Olmsted or even do a major national meeting or regional meetings, particularly with a lot of the states under a lawsuit right now, to help them come up with better ideas than just trying to build their way out of it, which you cannot do. It will not work. We tried, it will fail. And it's very expensive and it's really cruel. I mean, it doesn't do anything to help this population except make them worse. And so I know the Conference of Chief Justices will be very happy to collaborate with you on this. And this is a huge issue for them.
Great. Thank you so much for your comments, Judge Lightman. And I want to go to Jennifer Mathis next. I see you have your hand up and I know it addressed some of these areas as well. So Jennifer.
Sure, and I have to say I fully agree with Judge Leifman about the issue not being so much fixing the competency system, but actually preventing people from getting into the system in the first place. I mean, I think that is where actually a lot of the Justice Department's efforts increasingly are. We are starting to look at sort of the points where people are encountering law enforcement in the first place to try to divert people to, different responders in the first place, so that they don't get funneled from, a law enforcement responder to, sort of the obvious places, like a hospital or jail, but actually can get connected with, services that they need. And sort of focusing earlier rather than later in the trajectory of people's lives. I think this is always the challenge, right? And I think when we're looking at a lot of these systems, we're looking sort of too late, in the process. And I think a lot of the Olmsted work is aimed at not just getting people out of, the institutional settings, but preventing them from going in the first place and looking as early as we can to try to do that. I think the policing response work that we have, I think, is some of the most significant work, the findings that we did in Louisville and in Minneapolis concerning what happens in the first place when there's an emergency call, which may not be about a crisis. It may be a wellness check. It may be, any number of things, but that's where, people start this trajectory and things go south and people end up in the criminal system. And then you're dealing with forensic analysis and competency. And, we should be addressing it way before that point. And so, the work that we're doing using the ADA around the response, who is dispatched, when can you dispatch, mobile crisis team? Should you be dispatching a mobile crisis team rather than a law enforcement team? I think is important. That's not Olmsted per se. That's sort of, just a discriminatory response for everybody else who's having an emergency response because of a heart attack or a stroke. You wouldn't send a police officer, you would send a different responder, you would send a health response. And so, that is part of it, but then paired with some of those investigations and findings are other ones looking at the state's role. And, the state certainly is generally the primary funder through Medicaid of sort of the constellation of services that people need to succeed in the community. And so, looking at ACT and supported housing and the pieces of supported housing that you can cover through Medicaid and, the range of other services, peer supports, supported employment, et cetera. All of that, I think, is important to ensure that, people will be stable in the community and not have encounter after encounter after encounter. So we're not just fixing sort of the crisis problem, but actually preventing some of the crises in the first place. So I think that's right. I would also just say that with respect to the state hospitals, it's true that I think the IST issue is a significant driver of institutionalization, but I would say that state hospitals are really sort of a small piece of sort of the universe of segregated settings, institutional settings where people find themselves and often don't need to be. And so, hence, I think it is important, but it is also important to look at a lot of the other places where people are segregated. And there has been some litigation, I know, in Washington State, this True Blood case that is looking at the sort of competency services. I think they're trying to focus, as much as possible on community-based restoration rather than, doing it in a hospital setting. I just wanted to say a couple of things with respect to, I think, the significant issues raised by Judy. And I would say, I don't disagree with some of the points that she made. I would just say, I think, it is, in thinking about nuance, important, I would say, not to, tag everything labeled as Olmsted as sort of the solution or good. And if Georgia is, for example, using its Olmsted settlement as its only Olmsted plan, and that is their only response, and so therefore they believe that, there's nothing that should be done with respect to kids with mental health disabilities. That's not Olmsted's problem, it's Georgia's problem. And in fact, I think Georgia is currently being sued by other people around, the needless institutionalization of kids with mental health disabilities, not by us, but by private litigants. And it is an Olmsted theory. So I think they see Olmsted as actually a helpful solution. They're not sort of the source of that problem. But I would just say also, I think nobody really wants to be litigating Olmsted cases. I think the advocates who have brought a lot of the litigation, and I say this as somebody who spent the last 30 years doing Olmsted or work before there was Olmsted, there were other cases that were similar. The goal is not to be in court. And I think most of the vast majority of the Justice Department's cases don't end up being litigated in court. They end up settling. And I think it is always true. I take your point about sort of the concern about states being seen as bad actors simply, when you point to a problem. And I think it is always hard to sort of deal with that. I know the Justice Department always tries to say, we want to work with you, we want to work collaboratively with you. People often collaborate in an investigation, and they often end up bringing to the court a settlement agreement and a complaint at the same time, and never having filed a complaint in court. And so certainly I think that is everybody's goal. And I would say that most of my career in working on Olmsted issues has not been in court, right? Has been, you end up being the best buddies of your the people that you have sued or have threatened to sue, and you end up, for better or worse, spending the next 20 years working it out with them. And so I think I have found that actually I've grown to respect and work with, well, collaborate with, and like many of the folks very deeply who, are working on the state's end. I think we're all in this together.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for those comments. And so why don't we do this? We'll take a 10-minute break now. We'll have opportunity to pick up this conversation as well later in the meeting. Typically, we find the work group reports that may not go the full time, so we'll probably gain some time there. And then we'll also gain some time at public comment to be able to talk about this in other areas as well. But we'll go ahead and we'll break for 10 minutes now, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes. So thank you, everyone. Okay. I meant to announce at the top that at 2:20, I actually need to step away for a briefing with the secretary, and I'll be back probably about 45 minutes later, give or take. In the meantime, Deputy Assistant Secretary or Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Tom Cordair will step in my while I'm out. So just wanted to let folks know that. Okay. I think we have everyone back. All right. So for the next portion of the meeting, and again, we will have more time for questions coming up. But for the next section of the meeting, we will be hearing from Dr. Amy Cohen for a presentation on SMI Advisor, modern approach to technical assistance that makes an impact. So the SMI Advisor is one of our technical assistance centers that has truly been innovative in understanding the needs of the field and providing tailored technical assistance and needs. Dr. Amy Cohen is a licensed clinical psychologist and health services researcher who's currently the director of SMI Advisor, and she'll be sharing some information about what we're seeing and some of our work in this area. So Amy, happy to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Delphin Rittman, and thank you to the leadership of CMHS, who's really helped SMI Advisor over the years to become what I hope to be a modern approach to technical assistance. Next slide. As Dr. Delphin Rittman pointed out, the Clinical Support System for Serious Mental Illness, also known as SMI Advisor, is a SAMHSA-funded initiative that's implemented at the American Psychiatric Association. Next slide. So our mission is really to transform care for people who have serious mental illness so they can live their best lives. This is very aligned with the work of the ISMIC. Next slide. We are a national initiative that serves clinicians and providers across all mental health settings, and we focus on the 3 most common conditions associated with SMI, that is schizophrenia, major depression, and bipolar disorder. Next slide. So our audience of clinicians and providers, how do they reach us? Well, there's really 2 ways. One is that we have a website, smiadvisor.org. I just checked this morning. These slides are about 2 weeks old. We're over 2,030,000 visits to our website already. And then we also have a smartphone app available for free on both Android and iPhone. And we have over 27,000 downloads of our app. The addition of the app, in addition to having everything that the website has, also has a number of gold standard self-assessments that we use with this population. Individuals who are clinicians can use it during the clinical encounter. They can ask the questions of the measurement issue, answer, it will automatically score and interpret. And so that's a nice addition of the app. Next slide. So SMI Advisor really offers 3 categories of support to the field. One are accredited educational opportunities, vetted resources, and one-on-one clinical consultations. And I'm going to talk through each of these so you get a good sense of what we're doing at SMI Advisor. Next slide. So the first thing we do is really think about education to the field in order to improve knowledge and skill set. Next slide. We offer accredited evidence-based education. And when I say accredited, we really try to offer credits for everyone who might be touching individuals with SMI. So that includes physicians, psychologists, social workers, pharmacists, and nurses. To date, we have about 250 accredited webinars and modules. We always offer it live first so that the audience can interact with the expert. And then we catalog it for use in learning at an asynchronous schedule. As we know, many of our audience are very busy. We also every year offer about 20 accredited 12-week virtual learning collaboratives. These are smaller cohorts where people can really practice the skills. So for example, some of the ones that we've done in this last year on motivational interviewing, social determinants of health 101, implementing tools for symptom and functional assessment, and one on mastering clozapine. So a real variety for our audience. Next slide. To date, we've had 81,000 unique learners take advantage of our educational opportunities. As you can see, social workers, psychiatrists, nurses, psychologists, but also administrators, case managers, judges, advocates have also participated in our education. We've had over 274,000 registrations. And what that should tell you, if you're looking at the unique learners over the registration, is we have a lot of repeat visitors, and we've become a trusted resource to the field. Next slide. Now, I said at the kind of top of the hour, we did educational opportunities, and I also said vetted resources. And what I want to say here is that anybody here and anybody we work with can Google any topic related to the care of SMI, right? You can look up AOT, ACT team, supported employment, motivational interviewing. But what we do at SMI Advisor is take these resources that are in the field and vet them through two experts who have expertise in the topic. So when we take a resource, these two experts look at it to make sure it applies to care for SMI, applies to frontline clinicians, and represents the most recent evidence. If it passes all three of those by both of the experts, it goes into our catalog. So the field can be very reassured that anything that's in our catalog is really the best in the field. Next slide. To date, we've vetted and approved over 1,100 resources for clinicians. Next slide. And over 500 for individuals with lived experience and their loved ones. And I want to just pause here for a second and let you know that SMI Advisor is one of the few technical assistance centers that's carved out a part of our website that's specifically designed for individuals living with serious mental illness and their loved ones. And why is that important? Our mission is really to support clinicians and providers, but we know that helping develop strong advocates is one of the best ways to change clinical behavior, right? And so as a clinician, when individuals or their loved ones asked me specifically and said, well, I think the evidence says that I should be getting X, or why aren't I getting Y? That sometimes influences my behavior much more than a webinar or something else. So we feel at SMI Advisor that building this side of the website is as important as many of the other aspects we do at SMI Advisor. We also advise clinicians to go to this side of our website to find things that they can do as handouts, assign testimonial videos, look for things that are in plain language that really help people understand their treatment and help them on their recovery journey. Next slide. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, there are resources that don't pass the vetting process, or we look for resources on a topic that the field is asking us for, and we can't find one. And in those cases, SMI Advisor develops de novo resources on those topics. And here I've just pulled a few. We've usually developed somewhere between 20 and 30 new resources a year that we put up for the audience. Here's one on suicide and SMI, although there was a lot on suicide, not some specific to SMI. We've done a lot on the clozapine REMS, how to develop your own recovery practice, and dispelling a lot of myths around serious mental illness. Next slide. So we've gone over educational opportunities, we've gone over vetted resources, and I want to talk for a minute about our clinical consultation service. Next slide. Clinicians and providers in the field can easily access our website and our consultation service. We've made sure that entry to it is relatively easy, smooth, and quick. And people ask anything about the care for SMI. It might be psychopharmacology, it might be therapies, it might be recovery supports, it might be patient and family engagement. It might be about burnout. We guarantee that they'll receive guidance within 24 hours during the work week. And to date, we've answered over 6,000 consultations. Right now, we're pacing at about 25 to 30 consultations a week. Next slide. Now, when we think about consultations at SMI Advisor, it really is on a continuum. There are a set of consultations that really just need an email reply with the evidence, what it says, pointing them to the evidence and making some conclusions about those evidence that they can then use in their with their clinical judgment to make decisions. Next, some consultations require a little bit more of a conversation with the individual, and those might be a phone call, might be a set of phone calls to kind of discuss what's going on. And third are really in-depth consultations where we're contacted maybe by a bigger group or by someone who needs a larger or longer set of consultations to make the kind of transformation they're looking for. And I'm going to take just a moment now to go through some examples of some implementation site projects, just to give you a sense of the bigger consultations that we get. Next slide. So in addition to individual clinicians, we sometimes get contacted by whole clinics or hospitals or hospital groups. So here's one that we recently finished in Maine. We were contacted by the Maine Behavioral Health Care in South Portland, Maine. And they said, you know, we feel as if we're doing good work, but with some of our newer clinicians, we feel like a lot of decisions are made kind of on clinical gut rather than on numbers. And we'd like to do more measurement-based care. And we said, that's great. So we sent a team to Maine to train them on the BPRS, the gold standard assessment for psychosis. We did a train the trainer model. And so once we trained the first cohort, as new people joined the institution, they were trained by the trainer there. But then we did Zoom booster sessions to make sure there wasn't too much drift from the original training. Then we helped them with their EMR, they use Epic, to make sure that there was an easy tab to put in the BPRS ratings and to let it draw out over time how the person's scores were doing so that that could be shared with the individual with SMI and or their family and kind of say, okay, here's when your symptoms were a little bit worse. What was going on there? What could we have done differently? Here's when you were feeling really good over the last month. What do you think was going on there to really facilitate that? It can also offer a really easy visual when you share it with the rest of the team, maybe those with treating them for physical health ailments, for example. So we're really proud of this work in Maine, as it wasn't just a training, but then we knew that there would be sustainability with it being in Epic. So we were really excited about that. Next slide. In addition to clinics, we've also been contacted by states. So here is an example. We were contacted by the Ohio Association of County Behavioral Health Authorities. They represent 49 member boards representing 87 counties. And they came to us and said, listen, we feel like there's a lot of knowledge gaps that's leading to some skill deficits. And we said, okay, that's kind of a big definition. Help us with that. So we together developed a needs assessment that they distributed to their membership. That came back. And then SMI Advisor was able to develop a curricula that was really tailored to their needs. Rather than having them search the whole SMI Advisor website, we really picked out kind of a curricula that they could use over time. Then we tracked the utilization of those specific trainings by that state, and then was able to give them feedback on uptake at their site. So that was another really great and exciting piece of work that we did. Next slide. And I'll just say that we've also been contacted by done some national initiatives. For example, we were contacted, well, we weren't. SAMHSA was contacted by the FBI NTOC and assigned this consult to SMI Advisor. And the NTOC, if you're not familiar with them, they sit in West Virginia, have a very large footprint there, and they take all of the calls that have national threats to our country. Very important job. What they came to SAMHSA about was, listen, we're getting a lot of calls that don't have a national threat part to it, but clearly have a mental health issue. We're not trained in that. we're not able to meet our mission because we're getting more of those calls. Please help us. So we went there, learned a lot about them. They take calls 24/7, 365. They get about 4,200 calls and e-tips a day. And so what we did was really work with them, work with SAMHSA, and work with Vibrant and the lawyers at each place to develop an SOW so that there would be a warm transfer of the mental health calls to 988. This also took some training of the people on site at the NTOC to be able to do an initial assessment that was appropriate. We worked with their technology to make sure that the phones would have an easy transfer system. And then we worked with their workforce to develop some support for the people taking the calls. In fact, that led to the hiring of a psychologist specifically assigned to the NTOC. So the work there was really satisfying because we really moved the NTOC from being a place that was really doing a criminal justice response to behavioral health problems to a behavioral health response. And that was thrilling to do that kind of work. Next slide. Now, I want to just point out a few places in the SMI Advisor where we gather specialized content. We want to make finding answers as easy as possible for our audience. So there's some topics that we know we just gathered them together so it's real easy for our audience. Next slide. We have 2 centers of excellence, one on clozapine and one on long-acting injectables. And each of these centers of excellence gather the education, the resources, and the consultation service on these topics in one place. There's one landing zone for them at SMI Advisor. Next slide. We also have resource hubs on AOT, COVID and SMI, which we stood up in 2020. And we developed one on SMI 101. That was an idea that came out of the number of consults we were getting that felt like they were around some of the foundational things that you need to know when you care for people with SMI. Next slide. Out of our audience on the LAI and the Clozapine Center of Excellence came out some information in addition to consults that led us to developing a few tools. For example, we now have a clozapine dose planner tool, and this is based in the evidence. You can enter an individual's age, weight, sex, smoking status, and it will help you develop what their clozapine dose concentration should be. We also were getting a lot of consults asking us to help individual providers convert from an oral dosage to a long-acting injectable. We then made a tool to do that. So it's really easy for people to move from an oral to a long-acting injectable. And actually, since I did these slides 2 weeks ago, we've released another tool that I'm really proud of called the LAI Explorer. And this allows prescribers and clinicians to enter a number of variables or characteristics about an LAI. For example, what size needle does the person feel comfortable with? Where is the injection site? What's the storage needed? For example, does it need to be refrigerated? And clinicians can pick these number of characteristics on the left that they need, knowing the client that they're going to be working with, and it pops up with the LAIs that meet those categories. They can then touch each of those LAIs and learn more about them. So this allows a really nice, robust conversation to happen between the prescriber and the individual who's considering an LAI to find one that best fits their comfort level and their need. Next slide. Last kind of tool I'm going to talk about is our My Mental Health Crisis Plan. This allows individuals to develop a crisis plan and actually turn it into a legal psychiatric advance directive. Nothing is held in the cloud. It's only held on the app. And the individual who develops it, which either can be the individual who's going to have the PAD, or it can be a facilitator who's helping them, can then share that information using anything that you would typically use on a phone. So I can use a QR code, I can send it to somebody, I could send it to my clinical team, I could send it to my loved ones, I could send it to my partner so that they hold it, and it can be updated at any time. We feel that this moment in time that we're in right now with 988 just really sort of in its first 2 years is the perfect time for us also to be getting more people to have psychiatric advance directives so that they can have a voice during the crisis. So we feel this is an important tool. Next slide. I'm going to end with a little bit of bragging about the kinds of awards that we've won here at SMI Advisor through the generous support of SAMHSA. So let me go to the next slide. I have to start by saying thank you to the ISMIC. The ISMIC report in 2017, and SMI Advisor was first funded in early 2018. SMI Advisor used the 2017 ISMIC report to really lay the framework for SMI Advisor. We used the work of this group to develop a taxonomy that every single asset that we have is tagged to. So anything that's an education, a resource, or a consultation that comes in gets tagged to the kind of topic it is. And that kind of tagging, next slide, allows us to be a really data-driven project. When I think about SMI Advisor, I think of it as an ongoing conversation with the field. I get that conversation through the consults. I get that conversation through these data. So as you can see here, this is one of many dashboards that we have. All of our dashboards update every night at midnight. And I can look to see what state is doing what disciplines are accessing what. I can look after every single asset's released, who's using it, who's accessing it. And it's really informative. And it allows me also to have really good conversations with leadership at SAMHSA about what we're doing on even a weekly basis if needed. Next slide. And here's my little bit of bragging. I just want to say we've won a number of awards. We've won an award for our website, for our newsletter. We've won one for our PAD app and a couple conferences that we put on. And I just really am so grateful to SAMHSA and the leadership of CMHS, who has really made this into what I think is a trusted resource for our audience. And I appreciate being able to talk with ISMIC today and remind you that the work that you've been doing really influences what we do at SMI Advisor. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for that presentation and just for all the amazing work that you all are doing with the SMI Advisor team. We so appreciate the collaboration with the American Psychiatric Association on this. And kudos for that list of awards. It's always wonderful to see those, and so really appreciate the really important work that you're doing. So we're going to transition now to the working group report outs. And I believe, Dr. Shaw, you're going to take us through this section, Belina. And so really looking forward to hearing about the report outs from the working groups. I know there's been quite a bit of activity happening in between, since our last meeting. We'll likely break for lunch in between, and then we'll pick up afterwards, but we'll turn it over to Dr. Shaw now, who will take us through the working group report outs.
Sure, and I am just going to give the frame for what the working group reports, and then Dr. Delphine Rittman will shuttle the group through this important work that's happening. So just this format will be quite similar to our prior full ISMIC meetings. There will be a brief introduction to the working group and a review of the recommendations. In this meeting, the working groups have been asked to list all of the recommendations and then state the priority recommendations that they're working on. And from there, they'll talk about the triumphs, the areas that they have really seen some growth, improvement, and work at the ISMIC level, within the working groups, and also across federal government. And then from there, we will move on to group conversation. This is an area where they have created some prompting questions for the group so that the full ISMIC can have some ideas to jump off of and really think about how do you provide feedback to the working groups. And then finally, they'll close out with the discussion and voting of each group. So we have approximately 30 minutes for each. We are suggesting possibly if we can catch up a little time, maybe we can catch up of 25 minutes if we limit this to 25 minutes a group. And that will get us, they'll get 25 minutes right there. So if we can move on, I believe, and Dr. Delphine Rittman can introduce our first working group.
All right, thank you so much for laying out that process. And so now we're going to begin with working group 1 on data and evaluation. I'll now turn the floor over to Peggy O'Brien and so Dr. Peggy O'Brien and Dr. Nima Sheth. So happy to turn it over to the two of you.
Thank you very much. I am Peggy O'Brien, and next slide, please. So Nima Sheth and I are currently the co-stewards for Working Group 1, which focuses on data and evaluation. I'm a social science analyst in SAMHSA Center for Behavioral Health Statistics and Quality, and Dr. Sheth is Senior Medical Advisor to Dr. Everett in CMHS. Our federal group members include Jessica Barber of the VA, Kate Beislein of SAMHSA, Joel Dubinitz of ASPE, Jennifer Huminski of NIMH, Kirsten Painter of Neidler ACL, Sandra Resnick of the VA, Michael Schoenbaum of NIMH, and Mina Villingham of OASH. Jennifer Higgins of Commonwealth GrantWorks is our one non-federal group member. Presently, our group meets every 2 months. So these are the recommendations that we have been working from. We have focused on these. The first is to improve ongoing interdepartmental coordination under the guidance of the Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use. The second is 1.6, to use data to improve quality of care and outcomes. The third is 1.7, to identify and work to build on previous efforts to develop a quality measure that measures use of measurement-based care in community-based behavioral health settings. And 1.8 seeks to improve the national linkage of data to improve services. As you can see from the bold typeface on the slide, 1.1, 1.6, and 1.7 have been our major priorities over the past year, and those are where we will focus today. As you can see, they are all related to one another, and I'll explain that a little bit more in these coming slides. So priority recommendation 1.1 is to improve ongoing interdepartmental coordination under the guidance of the Assistant Secretary. Our working group on data and evaluation brings together a team with a great deal of expertise from across DHHS and the VA with expertise in measurement-based care, or MBC, and a focus on its implementation in the area of behavioral health. A federal working group that is specifically devoted to improving interdepartmental coordination on MBC meets alternate months from the working group. And to our knowledge, this collaboration is the only interdepartmental federal government effort focused primarily on measurement-based care, and it has allowed us to make the progress that we report on regarding priority recommendations 1.6 and 1.7. Next slide, thank you. So priority recommendation 1.6 is to use data to improve quality of care and outcomes. Our focus for this priority over the past 2 years has been on measurement-based care, with a long-term goal of supporting further integration of measurement-based care into evidence-based clinical processes in community-based settings providing behavioral health services. MBC is a best practice that uses data to inform and improve the quality of care and outcomes. Since the publication of our brief report on the ISMIC website and a SAMHSA-sponsored convening, our efforts related to MBC have continued, including moving into integration of priorities 1.6 and 1.7 related to measurement-based care and quality measurement. We have seen interest in measurement-based care and behavioral health care sparked by these activities. Among other things, it has fueled agency activities related to research on financing of MBC, development of technical assistance related to MBC, and the integration of recommendations for use of MBC into SAMHSA's updated CCBHC certification criteria. This has encouraged our group to double down and retain a primary focus on MBC that links all 3 of our priority recommendations. Next slide, please. That brings us to priority recommendation 1.7, which seeks to identify and work to build on previous efforts to develop a quality measure that measures use of MBC in community-based behavioral health settings. At the last full meeting of the ISMIC, we recommended, and it was accepted, that recommendation 1.7 focus on quality measures specific to MBC implementation in community settings providing behavioral health care. This was intended to strengthen our focus on MBC and to not dilute it by focusing 1.7 activities on quality measures too broadly. Since the last meeting, we have begun to better understand the lack of general quality measures focused on use of MBC and have met with representatives of the American Psychiatric Association and learned more about their efforts to develop such a measure and some of the challenges that they have faced. Next slide, please. So we have some questions to put to all of you. I'm going to turn it over to Nima and let you lead the group discussion and the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Bryan. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you all and talk about this really important topic. I'm mindful of time, so we'll try to have some discussion on this. Would love to hear some thoughts, but can always follow up with us later as well. So the first question is, are there other organizations that have quality measures on implementation of measurement-based care that we might investigate? And I'll just go through all of them so that way you can comment on any of these three. Second question is, if we were developing quality measures focused on use of MBC in behavioral health, what measures would be most needed or useful? And any other suggestions from the group as we move forward in our work on measurement-based care, such as the names of organizations or specific states implementing it now that we should be looking towards. So any thoughts on these three from the audience?
Nima, I don't know if the speaker from SMI Advisor is still on, but they clearly have been working in this area to some extent. I'd love to hear from them.
Hi, yeah, it's Amy Cohen. We have had a number of sites that want to do measurement-based care. We've mostly done it around psychosis with the BPRS, and then also put a number of those gold standard measures in our app, like PHQ-9, Audit C, et cetera. When we think about, are they actually implementing it? We feel like we need to take that extra step where it's actually in their EMR, has a place there, because it's really hard for them to, over time, remember what the person got last time and the time before and the time before, and then line it up with, for example, the medication or the psychotherapy or whatever they've been doing. So we've been working on that. In terms of organizations, I don't have any recommendations for that. Not that there isn't some, I'm not sure that I know those. But in terms of psychosis for measurement-based care, we've been doing some work on that with some different organizations, and we can talk offline about that if that's helpful.
Excellent. Thanks, Amy. That's really helpful. And I see a couple of suggestions in the chat as well. So from Brian and Dr. Shaw. So that's great. We'll take those into consideration. We have heard from Dr. Connors at Yale around measurement-based care in school-based settings. Some of these themes have also come up in the convening that we had on measurement-based care. So this is all really helpful. Well, if anyone has thoughts, for the future, please, feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to engage in more conversation around this. So I will then, believe that's our last slide. Pass it to Dr. Delphin-Rittman for the vote.
All right. Thank you so much to you both for the presentation and also for leading this working group. And so, barring any additional discussion, we'll just go ahead and move to vote to approve the report of the working group. So I'll entertain a motion to accept the working group's report.
Motion to accept.
Okay, thank you. And then Brian, that was you, I believe.
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. May I have a second motion to accept?
Second, Corey Minor Smith.
Fantastic, thank you. And would all ISMIC members who are in favor say aye?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed, say nay.
Aye.
Fantastic. All right, thank you. So this report is accepted. And again, thank you to this working group. Okay, so we will go ahead now and receive the report from Working Group 2. And so Working Group 2 is the Access and Engagement Working Group. And please note that Commander Barry, a faithful steward of the working group, will not be present for today's meeting. And so therefore, we'll be hearing from Tara Andrews and Jenny Vitas to provide an update on the discussion of work group number 2. And so I'm happy to turn it now over to Tara and Jenny. Thank you.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Vitas, and I'm a member of the Access and Engagement Work Group. And I provide support to the two stewards, Dr. David Barry and Tara Andrews. And today I'm sitting in for David Barry. So as this slide says, our group focuses on making it easier to get good care, trying to the extent possible to remove or smooth out potential roadblocks that people experience when trying to access care. And to the left of the slide, you can see the names of our federal partners and our non-federal group members. And I wanted to note that we're moving our meetings to quarterly. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tara. The background is, as we all know, there is a scarcity of behavioral health care workers, workforce shortages in the behavioral health field, including ongoing effects from the COVID-19 pandemic, inadequate behavioral health coverage, and there is a lack of diversity in the workforce that we do have. And underserved groups, including racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQI folks, individuals experiencing homelessness, they're disproportionately affected by this. So the Access and Engagement Working Group is striving to expand access to services by supporting policies and initiatives that increase workforce capacity and or provider reimbursement. As an example, last meeting, you may remember, I talked in some detail about certified community behavioral health clinics, or CCBHCs, and how that model specifically addresses concerns about access. For instance, in order to become a CCBHC, the organization can't deny anyone services regardless of income or residency or housing status. Organizations have to conduct a community needs assessment to determine just who the area's underserved populations are and how to better serve them and get them access. Very crucially, CCBHCs focus on timely access to care. 3 hours for crisis services, 1 day for urgent needs, 10 days for routine needs. So none of these months-long waiting lists. Flexibility of where services take place, requirement to provide peer services. So that's kind of an example of the kind of initiative that this group supports. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is all of the recommendations from the 2017 report, The Way Forward. So all 10 of them are listed. And our group has been focusing as priority recommendations on 4 of these. Next slide, please. So first one, 2.1, define and implement a national standard for crisis care. 2.2, building upon recent investments and momentum, continue to take steps to grow and transform the behavioral health crisis services continuum through partnerships at the federal level, state level, and local level. 2.6, prioritize early identification and intervention for children, youth, and young adults. Finally, 2.8, maximize the capacity of the behavioral health workforce. And then with a note below, 2.8a, include coverage of peer and family support specialists in federal health benefit programs. So that's just a little bit of background. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tara, who's going to walk through some kind of recent triumphs from our work group, as well as to discuss some next steps.
Thank you, Jenny. So as Jenny mentioned last time, we focused a lot on the triumphs of CCBHCs and the 988 program. And today we're going to focus a little bit more on some of the resources that have been provided through SAMHSA's Center for Mental Health Services. So in response to our identified priorities, 2.1 and 2.2, the Center for Mental Health Services has disseminated many resources lately that focus on the priority areas identified. Many of these SAMHSA products were developed with significant contributions from ISMIC federal and non-federal partners. SAMHSA recently published a snapshot of behavioral health crisis services and related technical assistance needs across the US. This resource is available on the SAMHSA's Block Grant Resources page and will continue to be updated annually with the most recent data available. The next report is expected to be coming out in fiscal year 2024, so keep an eye out for that. We've also hosted 5 state peer-to-peer learning sessions in recent months. These have focused on the crisis continuum of care, mobile crisis, and using Medicaid to finance mobile crisis. And these resources are also available on the state TA site. Next slide, please. So for priority 2.6, we're prioritizing an early identification and intervention for children, youth, and young adults. SAMHSA recently published the Coordinating Specialty Care for First Episode Psychosis, Costs and Financing Strategies report. This report was followed up by a webinar that's available on SAMHSA's website. The report found that the availability of coordinated specialty care has seen significant growth since the mental health block grant set aside mandate. But we continue to have insufficient level of services and we're not meeting the current need. So more work needs to be done there. For 2.8, the workforce initiative, workforce continues to be a priority for SAMHSA and the Access and Engagement ISMIC Working Group. In September, CMHS hosted a learning collaborative focused on addressing workforce need on retention and recruitment. And we're including workforce enhancements in our upcoming learning collaboratives, integrated behavioral health, and exploring other opportunities to bolster the development of the behavioral health workforce. The Access and Engagement Work Group is focusing on enhancing opportunities for our work group members to contribute to some of the initiatives or similar initiatives that are coming up through learning collaboratives, products, and other activities related to our priority areas. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, we've made significant progress, as you've heard, since the start of ISMIC in 2017. But we are interested in creating more opportunities for group participation that align with our membership's needs, experience, and expertise. So we put forth these questions to our group. How can we further engage you? How can we work to incorporate more of our ISMIC members into some of the priorities that we've been working on? We also are interested in how can we further align our members' interests with these future opportunities. So I put these questions forth to the group and look forward to your input. Thank you.
Tara, do you mind if I jump in? Because I know we talked a little bit as well. Sean, do you want to say what you're saying?
Well, hi, I just thinking that it might be worth doing a concerted engagement of self-advocacy groups across the country, a number of whom have a lot of perspective and I think some useful perspective and opinions on these two questions, actually, on crisis care and on the sort of opportunities for future growth and work in this area.
Thank you. That's an important addition. And I know, along those lines, we have like added, our youth move representative, and we'll continue to think about ways that we engage self-advocacy groups in this work. David? David Covington, and you're probably, I know it's crisis jam time too, so I know that you're probably doing a little double duty possibly.
No, I was just writing in the text, Belina, that when we're talking about new priorities or specific changes, SAMHSA's outline of targeted goals. Focus priorities.
You cut out when you said that. Targeted level goals. Can you repeat that, David?
I got some note that said that all the host muted everybody all at once. So that may be what's happened to David.
Okay. They were targeted goals, targeted levels for 2025 related to mobile crisis capacity and 2027 related to facility services that may be priorities for the ISMIC. Okay, hope like sort of now that the framework has been laid for the crisis continuum, how to make sure that there's the expansion of volume to meet the need is sort of what I'm seeing there. You guys feel free to speak up. You don't have to put it in the chat.
It looks like there's a comment in the chat about professional directories of recovery specialists from Jennifer Higgins.
Yeah, I'm thinking of working through certification outfits or some way of reaching them en masse would be easier if you started with a membership list that's publicly available. I know that all of our certified specialists are available via the website en masse for professional licensure.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? See a few comments in the chat.
Brian, what do you mean by your comment?
What do I mean by what?
Your comment about what can you describe the Olmsted incompetency discussion?
Oh, I was just looking at the one of the comments that I think a number of people have made was that when we're looking at the issue of competency, it's really how do we keep people out of services? So is there a way to tie that in with a recommendation to work with law enforcement to divert people from so that they get the services they need at the level that's needed, rather than police feeling like the quickest way to make an intervention is through arrest and take the person to jail.
Thank you. It looks like there's another comment in the chat asking if we've been engaging with peer crisis SMEs as well. And Belina, do you have any information on that? I know we've been trying to work more directly with the Office of Recovery, and that's certainly an initiative we're going to be focusing on in the months to come. Any thoughts on crisis, Belina, that you could add?
Well, I think to this effect, just even when we take a step back, is I think one of the strengths and challenges of this working group is that a lot has, like when this, in 2017, 988, really wasn't, it wasn't in existence. I mean, obviously the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline was, but, and just this significant flurry of activity around the crisis continuum has grown and expanded. And I strongly believe that this recommendation and this work, laid a lot of the foundation and the path forward for that. And so I think that this working group Specifically, I think that there's sort of some questions. Does this working group continue to stay in that crisis center focus? The same with the SMI and ESMI. I know that Tara talked a lot about some of the more recent activities, but just the set aside and the work that that has been able to be done because of the set aside is so important. And so I just think are those areas that we want to stay with this working group? Just in general, is the crisis space is still the space that we want to stay in, and then also the early SMI. SED space, is that the state space we want to stay in? And then I think we could talk a little bit more about, thinking about, how we engage people with lived experience and peers and throughout these areas. There is this weird feedback noise. Yeah, so I just sort of taking a step back, it's kind of, we've come a long way in sort of what's this next strategic direction for this working group, as well as the workforce piece and the peer piece is the other major area. And there's been a lot of growth in space in the Office of Recovery, the certifications, the standards. There's just a lot that's already been done, and which path to take and how to pursue that angle. I don't know whose feedback that is.
Hi, just a general reminder for everyone to please mute their lines if you're not speaking.
Getting a feedback. Oh, there it goes. Okay, good.
That worked.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and we'll move for a vote to approve this group report out.
So moved.
Okay, thank you so
Second.
much. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you so much. And so all in favor say aye.
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 And any
Aye.
opposed say nay. All right, great. So this report is approved. And again, thank you so much, Jenny and Tara, for all your work and for the work group's work in this area. Really appreciate the presentation and also the comments and discussion as well. Okay. And so now we're going to go ahead and move on to the next working group. Let me see, or we could take, let me see, how are we doing on time? We could definitely do our lunch break now.
I think we're on time for lunch, actually.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Why don't we take our lunch break now? So we will break for lunch and then let's come back at, why don't we come back at 1:25 and then we'll just go right into working group number 3, treatment and recovery, which begins at 1:25. So, all right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good lunch. And, just as a reminder, I'm going to be stepping off around 2:20 or so for a meeting with the secretary, and I'll be back on probably around 3:30 or a little bit before that. Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Tom Cordair will step in my place, and then I'll come back and relieve him as well. Okay. So I think we have folks are joining back in. All right, so for our next work group report out, we're excited to hear from the treatment and recovery work group, and we'll hear from Doug Slothberg and also Nancy Kelly, and happy to turn the floor over to them for their report. I believe they are both back on.
Yes, we're here.
All right. Thank you so much. And so I'll turn the floor over to you, to the two of you, for the work group report out. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Doug Slothberg from SAMHSA, and as Dr. Delphin Rittman said, along with Nancy Kelly, we are the stewards for the Treatment and Recovery Work Group 3. So as you can see, there are federal and non-federal members. I'm not going to read everybody's name because you all can see them, but I'll just say that I feel like, one of the strengths of this work group is the membership we have that covers a broad array of federal agencies as well as non-federal efforts. And I think, that gives us good coverage of a variety of different topical areas and really makes this working group helpful as sort of a touch point to make connections around activities, share information, and do all the things that the ISMIC is really intended to do. So, we feel very fortunate about that. We're meeting approximately monthly. Of course, we've had some gaps around the holidays and again in the summer when a lot of people are out, but generally roughly monthly. So next slide, please. So if you look at the recommendations from the original ISMIC report to Congress, you can see there's a lot of them. I'm not going to read all of them. They're very comprehensive, and they really sort of were very ambitious in looking at the whole mental health system of care in the nation, from top to bottom in terms of recommendations. So when it came time for this work group to sort of choose focus, we chose some certain specific ones to focus on to kind of make most efficient use of our efforts. So next slide, please. And the principle that we used behind that selection was really on looking at promoting adoption and support for evidence-based practices that have a strong base of support for their value, but that we see as underused and that could benefit from federal and non-federal promotion. So the ones that we chose were supported employment, supportive housing, and early serious mental illness, including first episode of psychosis treatment. So a strong focus on kind of social determinants of health, as well as people in early stages of SMI. So next slide, please. So in terms of triumphs, these are laid out more or less in kind of chronological order of how we've addressed these as sort of a major focus. So a year ago, our big focus at this time was on supported employment. I won't repeat last year's triumphs. I'll just say that we've followed up on those and continued to build on those. Last year, a policy academy for states was held around supportive employment, specifically for transition age youth. And that work has been built on this year with a learning community throughout the year for those states that attended that policy academy, to support them in continuing to build out the work that they did and implement the work they did around supported employment in that area. And that was a SAMHSA effort in collaboration with the Department of Labor. Also this year, we have a new policy academy planned to support the implementation of supported employment through CCBHCs. As well, the Department of Labor's Aspire initiative continues through ODEP, which supports 7 states in their kind of comprehensive approach to support the adoption of and implementation of supported employment. So, continuing to kind of build on the work that we did in the previous year and continuing to see, improvement in that area. This year, our special focus has been on supportive housing. I think we all know that homelessness and housing stability is very much on the national agenda. And, we've made an effort to support, the work of the ISMIC in that area. Obviously, we are all part of the All Inside initiative led by USICH, which includes HUD, SAMHSA, ACL, and other agencies who are here today, all participating in that. Also, under the auspices of HUD, there is a major housing supportive services accelerator being held this June that is being supported again by HRSA, SAMHSA, ACL. We should add CMS in there as well. All major contributors to that, to bring states in and really address ways to implement supportive services in combination with housing supports. Because I think there's a broad kind of recognition at the federal level that both of those need to go together. That it's two wings of the same bird, if you will, to have both housing supports and behavioral health supports. So we're looking forward to that effort. Our representative from HUD, Corey Minor Smith, who's here today, developed a comprehensive memo on HUD programs that support people with SMI, and we've been circulating that within our work group again to kind of look for areas of commonality and areas that people can work together and leverage the work that's being done in HUD. Also, SAMHSA this year will be working on updating the supportive housing toolkit, which was first issued in 2010. We know that there's a lot of stakeholder investment in that. A lot of stakeholders at the federal and non-federal levels make use of that. So we certainly plan to get a lot of input into that effort. And we'll certainly be working through the ISMIC as sort of a major source of connecting with people and getting that input. As well, sort of coming up on the horizon, our other big area of focus is early serious mental illness. And the big news this year was the standing up of an ESMI TA center at SAMHSA, which is going to provide direct TA in communities. It's already convened technical expert panel meetings and is in the development process for deliverables such as learning collaboratives and guidance manuals. So as well, ESMI continues to be supported through the set aside in the mental health block grant. And we continue to look for other opportunities to make connections on this issue. So, welcome any kind of input in that area as well. So next slide. So in terms of our discussion, we have a couple questions. First of all, around our two of our big focus areas, supported employment and ESMI. I mean, we know that a logical group to focus on are those who are coming out of the juvenile justice system. We unfortunately lost our DOJ representation this year from the group when Sarah Russo was pulled away by competing priorities, but we're really interested in getting any input or suggestions around how we can kind of connect some of the federal efforts around these topics, supported employment, supported education, ESMI screening and services with those kinds of justice intercepts for juveniles.
Thank you so much, Doug and Nancy. So any questions or comments?
Well, let me just say I was pausing for if there was any response on that question. I also just wanted to throw out our other question, which was around employment. We know that employment is a key social determinant of health. I think there's a feeling within the work group that maybe it's not fully appreciated how how important it can be. People kind of think of it as sort of like a nice add-on at the end, and don't necessarily appreciate like what an important kind of supportive service that can be in terms of recovery. It's very strong evidence base for continuing to have a positive effect on individuals even after the support is no longer there. So we also want to ask, how else do we think that we can kind of get the word out or make connections to include supported employment in other federal efforts? Increase awareness, increase education and understanding of the evidence base there as well. So those are our questions. Thanks. Dr. Everett?
Yeah, I was just wondering if one of our member from ACL might want to talk a little bit about the second point there, and then I have a comment about the first one, but I'd rather hear from other of our members, not myself, but ACL might have a comment on, or they do a lot of work on employment of folks with disabilities, including our SMI and where appropriate SED.
This is Sean Terrell, ACL. So we of course we focus a lot on intellectual developmental disabilities and employment, and there's a pretty well-established, supported employment, set of services and supports. I mean, it's similar. I mean, the IPS model in mental health is kind of like the model, right, for that. I did throw a thought out there around, that the outcomes for open dialogue for ESMI and employment are very high in other countries, and we're starting to do some of that work here. There's some, I just wonder if that's been talked about or thought about. There's a fair amount of research to support it. And again, there's a number of sites in the US that are, have been developing that, and the outcomes are really kind of like pretty significant. Again, in some other places, and it's been supported by the World Health Organization recovery documents, the various documents they put out on recovery. So it's not just a sort of it's not that small anymore. I would say, I guess it's getting recognized. So I'll throw that out there. I do have a comment in there also about the juvenile justice question, the first one, but you can read that. Thanks.
Yeah, I did want to just highlight, I know what open dialogue is. I don't know of any work that we're doing, but I was also thinking about some way, Doug, to make sure folks know about the work that we support through the NIDLR component of ACL, which a lot of those projects that we work with that part of ACL on have to do with optimizing employment opportunities for individuals. So maybe there's something there. I can talk with the stewards afterward about that, but
yeah, we'd have to get Chris, because I know there's several RRTCs that do employment work, but I don't know enough about them to comment right now. I'm sorry.
Right. No, I didn't. I apologize for taking the risk of putting you on the spot, but I think that might be something for for our group to know about and maybe learn about and see what can be done to promote some of the results, disseminate, I guess I should say, some of the results.
Great.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I will say, as far as open dialogue, I know that that's something that was identified by the technical expert panel in its first meeting. So I think that that's something that's definitely on the radar, and very interested in sort of suggestions about how to get that and other elements of ESMI treatment out there more broadly. So I would welcome sort of follow up offline with ACL about those kinds of things. And it looks like there's other hands raised as well.
Yeah. So Catherine and then Muriel.
Thank you. I appreciate your recommendations, especially related to housing. I'm just curious if in the treatment group there was any discussion about antipsychotic medications, especially for schizophrenia spectrum disorders. One thing that we found here, and I've talked to colleagues in other states, because so many patients with schizophrenia spectrum disorders are not in care, trainees who are training in care sites are not learning, for example, how to prescribe clozapine or long-acting injectable medication. And I'm just wondering if that came up in your work group at all as something to target.
That has not come up so far as a focus, but that's certainly some feedback that we can take back and discuss. So thank you for that.
And certainly that's a focus of the SMI advisor. So a different part of SAMHSA, not this one necessarily, looks at that. Catherine, if you're not familiar with that.
Oh, I am. Yeah, very
yeah. Okay.
And we appreciate SMI advisor very much. Thank you.
Marielle?
Muriel, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to make a comment regarding the first bullet regarding recommendations of connections of juveniles coming out of juvenile justice system. The Office of Justice Programs has our Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP, and they support the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council. And I believe SAMHSA is a member of that council. And I think that would be a good area or place for this conversation to come up. If that hasn't come up, I could certainly make those connections between this ISMIC group and our OJJDP administrator and that coordinating council, because I think that could be a place where these conversations can happen. And I am working with my colleagues in our Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention to get more representation from that office on the work groups of the ISMIC.
That would be fantastic. That sounds perfect, Marielle. Thank you so much for that. I will follow up with you about that after the meeting.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Jennifer?
Yeah, hi there. I just threw out the SBIR question because I was thinking that would be a wonderful way of ACL and NIDLR connecting through SAMHSA to address some of the SDOH barriers or gaps. And I don't know if the agency offers those types of grants or not. So it was more of a question and a suggestion.
Yeah, I can't speak to that myself. That's outside my area of knowledge in SAMHSA, but that's something we can certainly follow up on. And definitely, I know we talked about following up after this with ACL, so that's something that we can put on the agenda for those discussions.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a wonderful way of getting some innovation regarding some of these, systemic issues.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you for that question. And we will follow up. And what is that? What is the offer? What does that abbreviation stand for? It's always the alphabet soup. And I sometimes forget what these different abbreviations are, but what is the SBIR again?
SBIR is a small business innovation and research grant.
Okay.
So small monies, usually obtained by small business or, the private sector, but it could be a collaboration.
Okay. Yeah, so I do not believe that we necessarily offer them unless, a small business applies for a grant, but there is, we can get more information about that. There is a sort of division or an area within government that does do small business related work and engagement.
Yeah, excuse me, Dr. Delphin-Rittman, but I understood that there is sort of a congressional expectation or some responsibility for different agencies to offer the SBIRs. And I wasn't sure if you, as a subdivision of HHS, had such a requirement. I know that ACL and NIDLR seem to.
I can help out with that a little bit. Some of our contracts go they go the direction that are appropriate for that kind of a smaller business. That provide, sort of special services for us. So they're in that way, we are working, we have opportunities to work with them, but our regular grants are more service provider related grants.
Thank you very much, both.
Yeah, thank you. And it looks like NIH, so Mina, it looks like you had a comment related to this as well, that NIH does some work in this space.
Yes, ma'am. This is Mina. I'm just pulling up the website and I'll add it to the chat. It's the program's called Small Business SBIR, and then 24 NIH institutes and centers, along with CDC, FDA, and ACL fund scientists and entrepreneurs working to bring their discoveries to patients. So I'll add it to the chat, and happy to talk offline with you or Dr. Everett if needed.
Fantastic. Thank you for adding that in there. All right, so barring any other additional discussion from the group, then we can go ahead and vote on approval of this working group report. So can I get a motion to accept the work group report?
I move that we accept the work group report. This is Jennifer Higgins.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. And can I get a second motion to accept?
Ron Bruno is second.
Thank you, Ron. And all ISMIC members in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any nays? All right, great. Thank you. This report is accepted. And so thank you again, Doug and Nancy, for that report and for the working group for all the effort and all the activity that's going on within that working group. So next we'll hear from work group number 4, and I'll turn it over to Karen Gentile and Maya Banks. So Karen and Maya.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Delphin-Rittman. My name is Karen Gentile, and I am the director of what used to be called the Office of Policy Coordination and Innovation. As of yesterday, there's actually a name change for the office, so it's Office of Technical Assistance and Coordination. Please go to the next slide. Thank you. So our working group is the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Working Group, and I myself am a steward, and as well as Maya Banks, who will be speaking in a minute. And she's a supervisory public health advisor in CMHS's Office of the Director. I will also note that effective in April, Gregory Crawford will be replacing myself as co-steward. He could not be in the meeting today because he had a long scheduled leave with his family out of town and just we weren't able to work that out, but he will be here obviously from now on. He is a public health advisor in CMHS's Office of Technical Assistance and Coordination and joined SAMHSA in October of 2023 after approximately 25 years working in the adult and juvenile justice and mental health fields, serving in a variety of roles in the federal and local levels. And he comes to us from the National Institute of Corrections where he was for 11 years. So we're very lucky to have him. And he'll further introduce himself further in the October ISMIC meeting. So just our federal members. So we have, you see, we have quite a few. We have from DOJ, we have Mariel Lifshitz, Marissa Farina Norris, Brooke Mount, and Sarah Russo and Dia Boutwell. From ASPE, we have Jamira Howard. From Social Security, we have Taffy McCoy. From VA, Catherine Stewart. CMS, we have Kirsten Jensen and Michael Tankersley. And from SAMHSA, we have a lot of people, Linda Zeller, John Berg, Joseph Bullock, Roxanne Castaneda, Leah Compton, Greg Crawford, Aaron Atwaru, Joel Fuentes, and Tiffany Russell. So our non-federal members, Judge Stroud, Judge Leifman, Trinidad Arguello, Ron Bruno, and Catherine Warburton. And we meet every 2 months. Next slide, please. So I will not read this whole slide, but these are our recommendations. Just sort of quickly, I'll go through this. The 4.1 was saying that our work covers all points of the sequential intercept. 4.2, that we are monitoring of federal legislation relevant to the intersection of SMI, SED, and criminal and juvenile justice. 4.3, diversion and criminal crisis mental health services at all stages of the sequential intercept. 4.4 addresses competency to stand trial. 4.5, problem solving courts. 4.6, universal screening and confinement and the provision of assessment, treatment, and referrals when warranted. 4.7 is addressing solitary confinement, seclusion, restraint, and other forms of restricted housing. And then 4.8 is re-entry issues. Next slide, please. So we had a few conversations about this as a working group several months ago about whether we wanted to prioritize particular recommendations over others but we decided as a working group at that point not to have a certain focus because we really want to focus on all of these issues in the entire sequential intercept, and that we would address the recommendations as they came up through our work. However, in recent discussions, we have involved 4.1, 4.3, and 4.4, and you can see what those are. And the next slide. I think the next is Maya.
Ooh, thank you so much, Karen. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our triumphs. And before I get started, I just want to say that, what we've listed on the slide is, some of the work that the work group has done or is doing, but we wanted to just make note that there's so much work happening within this space, within SAMHSA and within our federal partners to address SMI, SED, criminal justice, and juvenile justice. So we definitely wanted to make note of that before we get started. So in terms of triumphs, since our most recent full ISMIC meeting, we've met twice as a full working group and once as a federal members only group. We've also worked to provide an input on a draft of the community integration self-assessment tool. And as you all listened to Kimberly Reynolds earlier, so she talked a lot about the tool. And this is the tool that will help states sort of assess themselves on certain topics related to community integration and related to the Olmstead decision. Also, we were able to provide feedback and recommendations for SMEs and resources to inform a development of a brochure on early identification and intervention for ESMI within the justice system. And so this is important because this is all about increasing awareness of the justice system as an important opportunity for early identification of SMI. Okay. The other thing that we're super excited about is we've conceived of a resource to bring awareness of funding opportunities across all intercepts and to guide communities on how to access the resources and engage in successful implementation. So as you all can recall, the last full ISMIC meeting, this resource is really in part a response to Judge Leifman's suggestion about addressing fragmentation within some federal services. Okay, so we feel like this resource does get to the spirit of that suggestion. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of areas for future focus, as Karen mentioned, recent discussions have really focused on recommendations 4.1, 4.3, and 4.4, but also over our months together, we've identified several areas that we really want to move forward with a very intentional focus. One being youth and criminal justice and juvenile justice settings. So again, this would be youth under age 18 who are in the criminal justice system. Also equity, also reentry, really looking at recovery and reentry services. As individuals are returning to their families, returning to communities, and we've heard a lot about supported employment and other things this morning. So definitely all of that would be taken into consideration as we discuss reentry. And definitely homelessness. We've also heard, I think many of you talked a little bit about homelessness earlier. So recognizing that intersection of justice, behavioral health, and homelessness. Okay, and now I think we can go into our group discussion. So we have 3 questions that we will pose, and I'll go ahead and read each one, and then we'll engage in the discussion. So the first question really speaks to dissemination of information, looking at sort of the technical assistance needed to utilize the information for underserved and under-resourced communities. The second question speaks to really promoting seamless transitions. So this one is all about how do we decrease gaps or disconnects between settings? And then the third question really speaks to collaboration and moving upstream. Okay, so we will start with the first question is how can federal agencies and non-federal partners enhance coordination and collaboration so that under-resourced communities receive key information about the following? So we're talking about our funding opportunities, best and promising practices, then also of most important, the training and the technical assistance necessary to take advantage of the resources and the opportunities. So I don't know if were there any comments or thoughts about the first question? And if you have an aha moment after our presentation, feel free to reach out to us.
Maya,
Yeah.
what about engaging OB? The Office of Behavioral Health Equity has the Elevate CBO initiative and the National Network to Eliminate Disparities. And not specific to criminal justice. I'm sure a lot of these folks who are especially focused on equity would find this as an important topic.
That's an excellent point.
I would also say really wanting to focus in on this emphasis on non-federal partners. I think sometimes we have a tendency, especially when we're sort of like in it, we're in the field day to day, that we kind of go to each other, when really if we're talking about community, we need to meet them where they're at. So maybe looking at community organizations that can share out things, doing webinars specifically for that community, reaching out to community organizations that focus on, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion efforts, reaching out to groups that do community and street outreach. Community organizers and street organizers are pivotal to this work in local communities and really spreading that resource and message on the ground level. So yes, I agree. Let's talk to our federal partners and the organizations we work with, but I think also going in almost the exact opposite direction as well may also be helpful, is go into that hyper local focus as well. Oh, sorry. This is Ark Telos Sanamor speaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent point. And Jennifer?
Sure, just following up on what Tay just mentioned, I would go grassroots. And I'm wondering, I think it was Brian who mentioned the geolocation, but geofencing is a, a great marketing tool to reach small, community-based organizations or groups or people at the community level. And I'm wondering if that had ever been considered as a possibility. It's probably, I don't know that that's typically what federal partners would do, but it's certainly a way of reaching non-federal partners who may not be apprised of what's happening at the federal level.
Love it. Thank you so much.
And we do engage stakeholders on the state and local level, so that's a great idea. And community organizations. Thank you.
Any other thoughts around question number 1? Okay, thank you so much for your feedback. And moving to question number 2. So really looking at how do we decrease gaps and disconnects and ensure sort of that continuous connection. Sean?
Actually, I have a thought about the previous point about going grassroots, which we agree with. I just want to point out that we are funding ACL a grassroots project to fund state and local development of advocacy groups, participant or self-advocacy groups to help build those up and to help improve home and community-based services broadly. We don't yet have an explicit focus on mental health, but we do have some work being done in that area through our independent living program. So just keep that in mind. If there's any interest, we could certainly explain the whole thing to you. It's a little kind of a complicated model, but we're making progress.
Excellent. We will be circling back. Thank you so much, Sean.
You bet.
Other thoughts on question number 2 or question 1?
Really, as Maya said, that the second one is really about how there's oftentimes people sort of fall through the cracks when there are transitions between, healthcare and behavioral healthcare, within the juvenile, within the justice systems, going to community settings and hospitals. And so how can we sort of ensure that, there are seamless transitions? Yeah.
I love this question. Oh, sorry, I'm not raising my hand. Ron, I see you raising your hand. I'm gonna leave space.
No, go ahead. I can jump in after.
This is Tay. I was just gonna say, I love this question. I think it's great. And this is actually not an answer. I think it's highlighting just another problem. But I will say, as a non-federal member of this panel, I'm like looking to y'all to answer this question, because as someone with direct lived experience within this, like I have definitely personally experienced the gaps in communication from going from one system to the next. And I guess as someone with that lived experience, I'd be like, I don't know, you tell me. You know what I mean? Like, what's the disconnect on y'all's end? Like, I'm telling everyone I meet with my story. I'm telling everyone, my caseworker, and what's going on with me. But I've experienced like interdepartmental miscommunication, if that's like a nice way to word it. So I would also say maybe like looking inward and evaluating our own policies on communication and cross systems partnership and what that looks like. And maybe there's some growth areas there as well. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Ron. Go for it.
No, thank you. That was a great point you just made. And I was just going to kind of give some kudos out and just say, where I've seen in my experience over the last 2 decades, what's really helped is the sequential intercept mapping that's put out by the Gain Center. So, I mean, any chance to actually expand that gets the communities together with the different players so that way they can design a seamless transition through these different systems. So I just kudos to SAMHSA for their support of that and anything that can be done to expand it.
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you, Tay. Excellent points. And so when you talk about expanding, do you have any suggestions, Ron, in terms of the expansion of the SIM?
Well, of course, it's just basically more money, do more, train the trainers. I mean, just it's really like look at that as just such a gem. It has been such a gem in so many communities. Even if they don't really they're not able to implement a full restructure of the entire 5-6 steps or points, they definitely can focus in on a few to help make this a seamless transition from parts of the criminal justice system back into the community, and possibly even bypass the criminal justice system at so many points. So yeah, expand, train the trainers, and also offer more community services, or just sending the teams out into the community to host those different types of SIMs.
All right, thank you. Anyone else around seamless transitions? And the third question was, what mechanisms can federal agencies and non-federal partners implement to promote cross-sector collaboration to be proactive to address the root causes of justice involvement? So how can we move upstream together? Tay?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, now I got second half of the day. I got opinions on everything now. What I find works very well in this area is smaller roundtables or focus groups. I feel like oftentimes when we're thinking like, oh, we want to reach out, we want to hear from the community, we go big. We do these big webinars where really we kind of end up talking at people, and then the time allotted for that, the direct dialogue or communication, always seems to get cut down due to time at the very end. And I feel like doing more direct listening sessions is helpful, where people really do have that feedback. Like even today, I know we're sort of sectioned off for community feedback, but it just seems like, communities here, they're listening to us, they want to participate. And there's like not a whole lot of room for that. So I would say like one would be like really careful and intentional, meaningful listening. I forgot who said it earlier, but consenting listening or informed listening. I was like, yes, please. And I think a sub of that is maybe a general mistrust is not a great way to put it, but I think sometimes when we ask the community for feedback, we may not get a whole lot back, because I don't think they think we're going to listen. Like, I don't think that there's that like trust there. There's that building up of relationship. So I think really starting small and building trust and relationships over time is going to help folks open up a little bit more to talk about some of these things, because in my communities doing community organizing, like we talk about, solutions outside of the systems all the time, because the systems aren't necessarily serving us. So we talk about the problems within the systems and then solutions outside of it. But then when a positive system change agent comes and asks us about that, we're really nervous. We're apprehensive. We don't feel like us telling them that is really going to go anywhere. So maybe again, parsing together this, like, we are listening to you, we are here, but also here's some like tangible ways that we're able to actually prove that we're listening to you, and making those into sort of tangible, actionable items, instead of just like, we formed a committee, we heard you, thanks, you won't hear anything from us for another 3-4 years till we form another community on the same exact problem. So I think maybe filling in that information gap would be helpful. I don't know if that made sense, but that was my ramblings for now.
That makes absolute sense. Thank you so much. Any other comments regarding the third question? Okay. Again, if you have an aha moment after the meeting, please feel free to reach out to us.
Was on mute. Thank you so much, Maia and Karen, and thank you for the questions and comments as well. So we'll go ahead and move a vote to approve the working group report. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved, Steve Leifman.
Thank you. Can I get a second motion to accept?
I second.
Thank you so much. And would all ISMIC members in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Thank you so much. And any dissents can say nay? All right, and this working group report is accepted. And again, many thanks to the working group members for all your work on that work group. And so now we will go to, actually, are we doing a break now? What's happening? Let me see.
We technically
we're
have a
good.
break,
Oh, we're at a break. Okay.
but I mean, we also might want to charge through and take a little break later since